Call to order the April 17th meeting of the Tarpon Springs Planning and Zoning Board. And our first item of business is if Mr. Vesey would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and an invocation.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm very grateful to be here tonight. I hope that everyone else is also. I unfortunately missed the last meeting, and it reminded me how important being part is. In addition, as we've just passed through the Easter holiday, I hope that we can take with us the best ideas and qualities and values of Easter and bring them to us here to make the best decisions for the future of Tarpon Springs. Amen.
All right. Thank you for attending the City of Tarpon Springs Planning and Zoning Board meeting. The purpose of the Planning and Zoning Board is to conduct public hearings on the items that come before us. The Planning and Zoning Board has reviewed the evidence in the agenda packet for each item on the agenda, and including the application materials and the staff report. The board will consider that evidence along with any new evidence or testimony provided at the hearing tonight. The board will consider all the information provided at this hearing in accordance with the quasi-judicial procedures by which the board is bound. I'll ask the city attorney to explain these quasi-judicial procedures at the appropriate time. This board uses these procedures to judge whether the application meets the intent of the city's adopted comprehensive plan, future land use map, and whether the application conforms to the city's currently adopted land development code and zoning atlas. The board will render a decision on each item in the form of a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners, who will take the final action on the item. The general hearing procedure for each item called by the chair is as follows: staff presentation, applicant presentation, affected party presentation, public input, staff and applicant rebuttal, and finally board motion, discussion, and vote. I call the meeting to order, and can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Seaman,
Here.
Mr. Vesey,
Here.
Mr. Zimbalist,
Here.
Ms. Francis,
Here.
Mr. Rockline,
Here.
Ms. Early.
Here.
All right, that brings us to changes in the agenda. We do have one change tonight, application 22-143, ordinance 2023-06, related to rezoning of property on North Highland Avenue, approximately 1,200 feet northeast of the intersection of North Highland Avenue and Keystone Road, is deferred to a date that will be re-advertised. With that, can we have the quasi-judicial announcement and the swearing of speakers?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have two items that are quasi-judicial on the agenda this evening. That is application number 22-126, which is item number 6 on the agenda, and item number 8, which is applications 22-93 and 22-94. The matters that are quasi-judicial these matters are quasi-judicial before the City of Tarpon Springs Planning and Zoning Board. In a quasi-judicial proceeding, the board's function is to make findings of fact based upon the evidence presented at the hearing and apply those findings of fact to previously established criteria contained in the City of Tarpon Springs Code of Ordinances. This is a legal decision regarding the application before the board. The board may only consider evidence that the law considers competent, substantial, and relevant to the issues arising from the application and the applicable code sections. Any and all persons providing testimony at this hearing are required to do so under oath. All persons testifying at this hearing must give their name, address, and must indicate whether or not they have been sworn for the record prior to proceeding with their testimony. All testimony and questioning at this hearing must address matters that are relevant and material to the issues under consideration based on the criteria established in the City of Tarpon Springs Code of Ordinances. If any board member has disclosures regarding an application, please make your disclosures on the record at the beginning of the hearing. This would include ex parte communications and voting conflicts of interest. If there is not a full board present at the beginning of the hearing, the applicant may request a continuation to the next regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning and Zoning Board. And we do have an even number of board members here this evening. And under Robert's Rules of Order, if there is a tie vote fails. The following is the established procedure which will be followed at this quasi-judicial hearing. First, city staff will present its testimony and evidence regarding the application, and then the applicant will have an opportunity to ask questions and cross-examine the staff and any city witnesses. The applicant will then have the opportunity to present its witnesses and evidence, and the city will have the opportunity to cross-examine the applicant and any of the applicant's witnesses. Then members of the public opposing or in support of the application will be given the chance to present their testimony and evidence. The applicant and the city may present any rebuttal, testimony, and evidence in a closing statement for summary. Then the board will close the public hearing for discussion and consideration of the application. At this time, anyone who desires to speak on any of these matters, if you would please stand and receive the oath. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth on the matters before the City of Tarpon Springs Planning and Zoning Board this evening? All right. Please remember to state your name, address, and indicate that you've been sworn when you come up to speak.
All right, that brings us to item 6 on our agenda. It's application 22-126, ordinance 2023-04. It is a quasi-judicial item. It's related to rezoning property located on the south side of Dixie Highway, approximately 400 feet east of North Pinellas Avenue. Do we have a staff presentation?
Yes. Good evening. Pat McNeese, Principal Planner. This is a request for approval of Ordinance 2023-04 for rezoning of city property located on Dixie Highway, just east of Alt 19. It's a little over an acre in size, and it is a built property with public services, city public services, utilities facilities on it, including a workshop, offices, storage, lift station, injection well. This is in the future land use residential medium category, and the proposed future land use is transportation utility. This board heard the future land use map amendment at your January meeting and recommended approval of that to the Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners will hear that future land use amendment on May 9th. The zoning is currently residential multifamily. Our digital and paper zoning map show it as residential plan development. Staff did some research and found that has been determined to be a mapping error. We found the ordinances that annex the property into the city. Those are in your packet. 8529 and 8539 show that it was annexed with a zoning of residential multifamily. When the adjacent planned development, Nature's Preserve, was platted right around 1998 or so, that's when we think this property was inadvertently included, and that was a mapping error that would have that put the RPD on this property. But we did check the Nature's Preserve plat and approval, and it did not include this property. So the proposed zoning is public, semi-public, and the city is requesting this rezoning and the future land use map amendment that you already heard to align the current and really long-term future uses of this property with the appropriate categories. This just gives a context of the property, the surrounding area. There's a lot of wetlands to the east, northeast and southeast. Across the street is the Leslie Hale Complex Church there. There's some residential, some platted, and some meets and bounds older lots in that area. To the northwest, there's some vacant land and industrial. Just to the south here on Alt 19, there's kind of a mix along that corridor, and this is just an oblique aerial of the site itself, the developed site, and the wetlands surrounding it, and then across the intersection, some of the developed area or developing. You'll note this feature here is the Alfers spur of the Pinellas Trail that will be extended up at some point, extended up this way. So that's the old railroad bed. This is just a picture of the site from the Dixie Highway entrance, showing some of the buildings on the property. So this is the future land use map, and as you can see, this Alt 19 corridor, which we talked about in January, is really long-term slated to transition away from residential to more commercial office type uses. So those are some of the city zonings which are shaded, and then the county zonings are on the aerial. I'm sorry, future land use. This is the same thing with the zonings, showing some of the county zonings on the aerial photography, and then the city zonings in the shaded area. So the subject property is RM, and then you've got the surrounding area with several zonings on it, but again, the corridor is kind of a mix and transitioning towards commercial and office, and then you've got nature's preserve development over to the east, and kind of a mix over to the west of all different types of uses. So your rezoning criteria, you've got 4 criteria. I will say, suggest that you take a look at the staff report for a little bit more history on the property. Under planning considerations, gives a little bit more information on the property. The proposed public semi-public zoning category is consistent with the transportation utility future land use map category that's been recommended for this property. And you did a full analysis of the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan with that review. I included the numbers in the staff report. I do have them if you have any questions about those. But that review was done in January. And we feel that the existing uses of the property are appropriate for this property and compatible with the area. The property is really sized for what's on it, to be practical for what's on it. You'll see a table on page 3 of your staff report analyzing the differences between the residential multifamily and the public semi-public zoning. You'll see a lot of uses that go, try to include everything, I think, that could be public, semi-public, including airports and power generation plants. Wastewater plant is one. We had some inquiries about that. This property is really too small for that. It's not planned for those types of uses, and it is in a coastal high hazard area. So we feel criteria 2 is met, and that criteria 3 is met, providing for efficient and orderly development. To continue this use, let public services maintain maintain and adapt this site as needed, replace it if anything's destroyed. And then it is served by city facilities right now, so we do have all the city facilities serving this property. Obviously, some of the facilities listed in this criteria, there won't be a need for those anymore because you would be removing the residential designation from the property. This was reviewed by the TRC on December 8th, and they sent it, deemed it complete and ready to go to hearing. So staff recommends approval of the ordinance 2023-04 to rezone the property to public, semi-public. We did provide public notice, and we had a couple of, we had some inquiries, and we had two main comments. Some of the folks over at Nature's Preserve wanted to know about the potential for a wastewater treatment plant, and our public services director did relay that there are no plans for that, and it's not really practical for that use. And then there were inquiries about the existing injection well on the property. The two comments are in your packet. Staff did address the injection well question. That injection well is in, and there's a memo in your packet regarding that from Mr. Tommy Kiger, who's here this evening. If you have any questions, he's the Assistant Director of Public Services, so he's here to address any questions you may have on that. And then just to kind of, I just added this because remember now, you are separating future land use map and rezoning hearings. They can't appear on the same agenda, so it gets confusing, or it could be potentially confusing to the public when these are heard. The future land use map amendment, you heard it in January. It will go to the Board of Commissioners on May 9th, and then this rezoning will go to them on May 23rd. Those are first readings. This has to go through a countywide plan amendment, so then it will go back to them for a second reading after that. Are there any questions?
If I remember correctly from when we heard the related item, I believe the staff was asked whether there was any plans for further development, and at this time, I believe there weren't any. Is that correct still?
I would say that's correct, and again, Mr. Kiger is here to address any specifics. But
Okay.
yeah.
Well, if you'd like to address that, just to be certain, it looks to me like there's not room to do much more there, but.
Yeah. Okay. Oh,
Good evening. Thomas Kiger, Assistant Director for Public Services. We don't have any really concrete plans for redeveloping the site. It's a master lift station for wastewater service for the north half of the city on the north side of the Anclote River. At this point, we're working on redoing our 20-year capital improvements plan. There'll probably be some minor repair and rehabilitation of that lift station over time, but nothing really dramatic that we're planning currently for like redeveloping the site. It's going to continue to be a lift station, and it's also the sort of base of operations for our utilities maintenance group. So as things become older and age out, we'll likely to continue to replace them, but it's going to continue to be a lift station.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for staff?
Yes. When you say it's going to be maintained, will there ever be any upgrades increasing its ability to serve more capacity?
That's not planned currently, depending on levels of growth and things like that in the future on the north side of the river. It is the master lift station, so potentially in the future the pumps could be upsized and things like that. It has a lot of capacity right now, but any increases in capacity would probably not significantly impact what it looks like or the surrounding areas or anything like that.
Any further questions?
Just briefly, you are entering the city's file on this matter for the board's consideration as evidence, correct?
yes.
All right, thank you.
I just had one question, and this is actually for Regina. Is this, because it's a city application, an instance where the city's advised that they can seek counsel of their own?
Yes, they can, when they are presenting in this manner, because as you know, I represent you all as a body. So to the extent staff and these types of presentations ever feels that they need representation to bring this forward, they can do that. But they have not asked for that additional representation.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
If there's no further questions for staff, this is kind of confusing in this case, call for applicant presentation, but you kind of are the applicant in this case, so that's been done, I guess. So we would go to public comments at this point. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak either for or against this item? Please approach the microphone and state your name and address, and then make your comments.
Thank you. My name is Steve Spencer. I'm a member of TS Mitigation LLC, the ownership of the land that is to the east. It's about 14 acres. The address is 2181 Indian Rocks Road, Largo, Florida, 33774. I happen to be a licensed architect also, and I'm here because as an owner, I'm concerned what's there, and I know how important certain lands are to the city of Tarpon. I actually, about 21 years ago, was in front of this board and got some approvals, but the land happened to be the entrance to Sunset Beach Park, a couple acres. The city even had their sign on it, and I ended up just reading what the citizen said. You know, it'd be nice if Mr. Spencer would donate the land, and so I did. It's about $800,000 piece of land donated in 2002. So that's why I'm here today, because I feel this is bigger than everybody's thinking. First of all, it's so wrong how this happened. This is called reverse engineering. They built a project on property that clearly doesn't have the zoning or land use. Didn't have. We shouldn't even be having this discussion. That should be vacant land. We should be going in front of, and that city would be asking for a rezone and land use, so they would then be allowed to build this. Now, you don't just build something and then go change the land use and zoning to make it fit what you built when you weren't supposed to build it in the first place. And I'm a little disappointed to hear, well, we don't need any more room on that facility, when the city of Tarpon Springs wanted to buy some of ours to double the size of that facility. As a matter of fact, they had already built on it and were using it, brought fill in, and it actually squared their piece of property off, because the piece they have is a triangle, and if you flip it, it made a perfect square, and that's what they wanted to buy, but they didn't want to pay the market price, so that went away. And to say it's big enough, last year they pulled a permit to build a new building on there, metal building. I think it's a couple thousand, 5,000, 3,000 square feet. And you know, we have this property, there's a spring on it. We got the property, DeSanti had owned it. I mean, there's a spring they wanted to get water out of. It's right on the anclote. There's little fingers that go into the anclote. And the injection well, I mean, when I was watching my Zoom the last time this came in front, the board asked the definition of injection well. Staff was Googling it, trying to find out what it was. Well, I'd like to know what is being injected there. It's
you
not
want us
sewage,
to-
right? It's not going to be sewage, so injection. What was being injected?
So this is actually time for public comment, and if the board wants her to answer questions after public
Okay.
comment is over, then she can answer questions,
I
okay?
apologize.
That's all right,
It's
thank
been
you.
a while. I was on Town Bible Air Planning and Zoning for 14 years. It's been a while. I'm a little rusty. But I can tell you, I don't think they're injecting oxygen and clean water from there. I think they're injecting something that nobody would be happy being injected near the anclote. And they may have a DEP permit, but DEP doesn't check zoning and land use. This should never been built there. On their building permit, it says the land use, residential. What they want to build, commercial. That just, nobody could go get a permit to build something that doesn't have the proper land use and zoning. I think, you know, there's enough problems going on, and the public didn't have the ability to be aware of this building being built. It's there. You can't simply change zoning and land use because something's there that shouldn't be. And to say it's large enough, not gonna increase, that's just not, nobody's got a crystal ball, but they wouldn't have wanted to double the size if they didn't need to. They wouldn't have built a new building last year if they didn't need to. And I just am, I'm a little bit upset about it, and I think it's just really the wrong place if anything's being injected there, and it really should be residential. That's what the acreage is I have. It butts up to part of our wetlands that our uplands that we can build on. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other comments from members of the public? All right, seeing none, we'll close the public comment. Does staff have any rebuttal or closing comments?
I can address the zoning. As you can see from your staff report, the current zoning does allow public and semi-public uses with some acreage restriction, which this is actually under, and having to utilize those district standards. But it's really not appropriate for that, what is meant to be a restricted use in the multifamily. It needs to have a public, semi-public designation. I don't know exactly when this was built. I don't know if Mr. Kiger has that information, but it is a permitted use in that zoning. So, you know, it would not have necessarily have to have been rezoned in order to install this facility. As for the other question, I think that we can answer. There were several points. The injection well, and Tommy can probably help me with that. Yeah, they told me what it was, but.
Thank you again. Thomas Kiger, Assistant Director for Public Services. Regarding the original dates of when this property was developed as a lift station, our records indicate that it dates to the mid-1980s, around 1985 or so. So it's been a lift station, to our knowledge, you know, for over 30 years. Regarding the injection well, it's a fully permitted injection well. The Florida Department of Environmental Protection went through multiple rounds of public hearing and public workshops. We actually had a public workshop here in this building in 2013, 2014. And again, we issued multiple notices of intents to inform the public, or inform the public of the permitting activities for the injection well, all the way from 2014 through 2017 as part of building the reverse osmosis water treatment facility. So the purpose of the injection well is it serves our reverse osmosis water plant, which supplies water to the city of Tarpon Springs and our residents. The way reverse osmosis works is you take salty water and you put it through some membranes to treat it, and you get 80% of the water comes out fresh, and the other 20% of the water has all the salt that you started with. So you end up with a sort of just salty saltwater brine, and you have to do something with that. So 80% of the water that's fresh goes to the city to provide safe, affordable drinking water. And the other 20% we have to dispose of it. So it's disposed of via deep well injection into a salty zone of the Upper Florida Aquifer System, the Avon Park Formation. And that's very standard practice for reverse osmosis facilities up and down the west coast of Florida. This was a project that was cost shared by the Southwest Florida Water Management District as a good alternative water supply to reduce stress on the aquifer, and was viewed as beneficial for improving our diversity of water supply in the Southwest Florida region and achieving a good sustainable alternative water supply for the city of Tarpon Springs.
Thank you.
I have a quick question, if that's all right. And it's just to edify myself, you said the 20% that's left over is actually what gets injected.
Yes.
And that's the briny 20%.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, since it's the FDEP, they think it's all right, considering the spring that's on the adjacent property and the enclosure, that's all proven to be safe?
Yes, all injection wells in the state of Florida meet both federal regulations from the EPA and also state of Florida additional regulations. That's regulated through DEP's underground injection control program, which is quite strenuous. There's multiple rounds of permitting that you have to go through. So you have to go through an operational test period, and you also have to continuously demonstrate that anything that you're injecting, depending on the type of well that you're constructing and what you're injecting, in this case it's, salty brine. In this case, we have to demonstrate that it's not upwelling or migrating to any other areas of the aquifer that would potentially impact existing legal users of water from those production zones.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I actually remember the injection from the Citizens Academy, the reverse osmosis plant. But I do have a question about the timing of the rezoning. Why is this, after all these years, why now?
There's no special reason. Public Services just wanted to basically clean up the zoning on the property. They went through, I think they had a couple years ago, permitted a building on site. And really, this is to clean up your map, I think.
Yeah, we've also been identifying other city-owned properties and moving them all into public, semi-public. We've recently done that in the last couple of years with this property as well. So we have a lot of these public uses that were stuck into residential zoning categories, and so, we just feel like it's better to have a separate zoning category that addresses these public government type uses. So we're systematically cleaning them up, this is one of them.
And for the record, that was Renee Vincent, the Planning and Zoning Director. Thank you.
All right. I guess at this point, we'll bring it back to the board for consideration. I need a motion and a second. The motion must be in the affirmative, and then we can discuss the matter further.
Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve application 22-126, ordinance 2023-04 as submitted.
I would second that.
All right. Do we have board discussion? Seeing none, can I have a roll call, please?
Ms. Early,
Yes.
Mr. Rockline,
Yes.
Ms. Francis,
Yes.
Mr. Zimbelis,
Yes.
Mr. Vesey,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman.
Yes. All right, that brings us to application 22-141, ordinance 2023-05. This is a legislative item. It's a future land use map amendment for approximately 6.71 acres at 44098 US Highway 19 North, from residential office retail to the commercial, general, and preservation land use categories. Can the attorney read the ordinance by title?
Ordinance 2023-05, an ordinance of the City of Tarpon Springs, Florida, amending the future land use map for 6.71 acres, more or less, of real property located at 44098 US Highway 19 North, from land use designation ROR, Residential Office Retail, to land use designation CG, Commercial General, and P, Preservation, providing for findings and providing an effective date.
And can we have the staff presentation, please?
Yes, Allie Keene, Senior Planner with Planning and Zoning Department. As you may all recall, you originally heard this request back in February of this year. At that meeting, the board did have a vote of 3-2 to deny or have an unfavorable recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. Following that hearing, staff did identify that some misinformation was provided in the staff report and presentation. Last month, the applicants came back to the Planning and Zoning Board requesting a rehearing of the application to have the correct information provided to the board for consideration. You all did approve a rehearing request, and this application was re-advertised for tonight's meeting. And all of the staff reports and presentations were updated to reflect the correct information. As a reminder, this property is located at 44098 US Highway 19 North. The current land use designation is ROR, Residential Office Retail. The applicants are here today requesting an amendment to the CG, Commercial General, and P, Preservation land use categories. The zoning of the property is currently HB, which is Highway Business. The property is a total of 6.71 acres in size. There is a 0.2 acre area in the southwest corner of the site that is wetlands, and that is the area that corresponds to the P Preservation land use designation they are requesting. The property itself is currently vacant. It was formerly operating as a commercial golf driving range, which has ceased operation. And the applicants are requesting the future land use amendment to be more consistent with the current HB highway business zoning designation of the property, as well as to remove the requirement to develop this property as mixed use. This is a location map. The property is outlined here in yellow. It's off of US Highway 19 North. The area along 19 in this vicinity is primarily a mix of commercial and light industrial uses. There is an existing townhome development to the south of the property, which is Brittany Park Townhomes. Immediately to the west of the property are some wetlands area. And then looking north across Pasco County line, there is a mixture of commercial, office, and warehouse uses. And then across US 19 frontage, there's a mixture of different industrial and retail uses. This is a survey of the subject property. Again, the area shaded in green corresponds to the wetlands on the property, and this is the area proposed to go into the P preservation category. The most significant feature on the site is an existing 100-foot wide Duke power line easement. The presence of this easement is one of the primary reasons for the requested amendment. There are some compatibility issues with residential development on this property because of that easement. This is a look at the existing future land use map. Again, the property here borders the Pasco County line on US 19. All of the property along US 19, with the exception of Caliber Collision, which is this property right here, north of the Anclote River, is in the ROR or ROG mixed use land use categories. The Caliber Collision property went through a land use amendment back at the time it was developed in order for it to develop as that industrial use. Looking across the Pasco County border, again, the future land use designations for that county are a mixture of industrial and commercial, and there's some residential across US 19. Looking outside the US corridor, there is some residential development of existing subdivisions. This is a look at the Ford Pinellas countywide map. The property is located in the R&S Retail and Services countywide land use category. The proposed amendment does not require a change to that map. This table here is comparing the current future land use category of residential office retail with the proposed CG land use category. One of the primary differences is the ROR category is a mixed-use land use category. The comprehensive plan requires mixed-use land use categories to have properties develop mixed use, meaning that this property, future development, would be required to have a residential component on that property. As I stated earlier, the presence of the Duke Energy easement that bisects the site limits some of the compatibility and abilities to develop the property for residential, so the applicants are proposing to go to the CG category, which is consistent with the current zoning category on the property and does not require that residential development component. Some of the other primary differences between the two categories, and I apologize, this is a little small on the screen, are the allowed uses. The uses that I have highlighted here in orange are the ones that would be additional to what they could currently do today. Those include wholesale distribution, storage and warehouse commercial, commercial recreation uses, light manufacturing and assembly, residential equivalent and transportation utility uses. The other primary difference between the two categories are the maximum floor area ratio. The current land use category limits commercial uses to a 0.2 FAR and office uses to a 0.3 FAR. Approval of this amendment would allow the property to develop up to a maximum of 0.4 FAR. As I mentioned previously, this property has a current zoning designation of HB Highway Business. This is the most intensive commercial district within the city. It allows a range of commercial, office, and light industrial uses. The only type of residential development permitted in this zoning, or potentially permitted in this zoning category, is multifamily, and that does require conditional use approval, which, as you know, requires public hearings. If the amendment is approved, I did go through all of the highway business land uses that could potentially be allowed either by right or through the conditional use process. I've pulled out, and what you see here on the screen are all of the uses that potentially would now be an option for this property if the land use amendment is permitted or is approved. And really those range mostly for allowing for some more commercial recreation uses, some light industrial uses, as well as some storage uses through the conditional use process. And there was a full list of all the highway business land uses provided in your packet that highlight what's allowed now and what would be allowed in addition. When looking at the future land use map amendment review criteria, as far as consistency with the Florida statutes, this application does qualify for a small-scale amendment and meets that criteria due to the size of the property, and it does not require any text changes. It is also not located in an area of critical concern. Staff did do a full review of all 12 elements of the comprehensive plan. All of the applicable goals, objectives, and policies were listed here on the screen as well as in your staff report. Overall, staff does believe that the allowable uses, densities, and intensities of the requested CG land use category are consistent with those that are permitted in the highway business zoning district and are appropriate for the surrounding uses along the US 19 corridor. Further, the proposed CG category does eliminate that requirement to have a residential component as a part of the future development, which is more consistent with the development pattern on US 19 north of the Anclote River, as well as responsive to the Duke Energy easement on the site. And lastly, consistency with the countywide plan. As I mentioned, this does not require any amendment to that map. With that, staff does recommend approval of ordinance number 2023-05, a future land use map amendment from the ROR residential office retail category to the CG commercial general and P preservation categories. As I mentioned in the beginning, we did re-advertise this application for tonight's meeting, and staff has not received any responses from the public. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yes, I've got a couple. First off, I'm a little unfamiliar with the townhouses immediately to the south. Are those condos that are owned by the residents, or are those rental units?
I believe they're owned by residents, but I believe we may have some representatives here tonight that can answer that question.
My question really was to determine whether the people that live in those townhomes were noticed as part of the noticing process.
I can verify our list. It depends on how it is on the property appraiser's site.
And then, obviously, I'm concerned with the south portion of the property because it is so close to the townhomes. I mean, they're sitting practically right on the property line. If we should feel so inclined, are we able to make recommendations about larger than normal buffers and larger screening vegetation or things like that? Or is that something that doesn't come until the site plan process?
I may need clarification. I don't know if are you able to add conditions to a land use amendment?
So yes, the condition has to be reasonably related to whatever it is they're trying to cure. This is not a site plan approval though, so a lot of times when you do have those types of conditional, well, technically because this is, you're changing the land use on it, you're not approving the site plan. Site plans have that, but when you're doing the zoning, it doesn't usually have those types of conditions attached to it. So that would be something that would be specific to whatever harm they would be trying to prevent during a site plan approval process, and that's not what this is.
Okay. Yeah, so any conditions like that would have to be attached to the site plan, which would come back before you.
What about the floor area ratio? Could we recommend a lower floor area ratio? Because that's a very significant change. That's probably the most significant change in the amount that you can build on the property, to go from 20 to 40 on that.
Based off of that explanation, I don't believe you can provide those limitations. And again, at the site plan level, that potentially can be part of the conversation.
Other questions?
I have a question. I'm trying to compare the previous application to today's application, and I'm having a hard time finding the mistake that was made, because I was under the impression that we're rehearing this, which we voted on, because the current use was incorrect. But the only difference I can see in the application is on the land use category comparison page where, and again, the original use offers more possibilities than, am I missing something? Where was the mistake?
So all of in the staff report, all of the new information is shown in red on the staff report. We also did strike through for any of the information that was incorrect.
But I mean,
So
since
really,
we're
the
rehearing
primary difference in the staff report was in the chart that's in the staff report, as well as, let's go back here. This table, the category that was listed in previously under ROR, it was citing the wrong primary uses, secondary uses, and floor area ratio. We looked at the ROG category by mistake, and that was what was in the original staff report. So what we did in this staff report was we updated it to show everything in red is what is actually allowed currently today. Everything struck out was the incorrect information.
So the ROR was the correct category, it was the
Just
uses that you
correct.
listed in between that were
Yes,
incorrect?
yes.
Okay, and if next time, if there's another rehearing, if we can see that, because it's having to go back and compare things, is time consuming, and I just would rather see that, because otherwise we're just rehearing the same exact thing and without seeing why we're rehearing it again, so that could just be highlighted.
So, it's just so for clarification,
Yeah.
you'd like to see it in the presentation as well?
Right, yeah, I mean, I'm just
Got
going
it,
through
no
it, because
problem.
I was thinking it was the ROR was the wrong thing, and but
Understood.
the ROR was correct, it was the list of
Yes.
what was in between it, so I just wanted to see the actual.
Okay, yes.
Any further questions for staff?
Yeah, I've got a question. When I look at the conditional use public hearing process, I took note to heavy utility services. What is that?
She's gonna pull up the definition for you. I think we have in our code a difference between light and heavy.
That was my question.
Could be a nuclear treatment plant there.
Yes.
I've got it.
Oh, Pat has it. Go ahead.
The definition of heavy utility service reads, establishments engaged in the generation, transmission, and/or distribution of utilities including electricity, gas, or steam, potable water and sanitary sewer systems, and the collection or disposal of solid waste, including sanitary landfills. The term heavy utility service shall include related service and supply yards in excess of 1 acre in size.
Heavy duty.
And then for clarification, if that were proposed use on this site, if the amendment is approved, it would require conditional use approval. So it would come back before both you and the Board of Commissioners for review. And the site plan associated with whatever that utility use would be paired with that conditional use request.
I have a question, Chairman, and whether or not it's for council and staff or a combination thereof. At this point in time, is there any mechanism in place that would allow the applicant to segregate parcel A and parcel B for use or zoning designation due to the fact that the differences are substantial for the south parcel, parcel B, because of the abutment to the residential townhomes, and making it, match with the north parcel, I think is really unfair to, the existing residents there. So I don't know if the applicant had any consideration for that, or if in fact it's something that could be enabled by the staff recommendation or the applicant acceptance, or if that's something that we can impose at this stage of the game, because by the time you get to a site plan, the zoning's already changed.
So right now, the application is for the full site, the full 6.7 acres. I do believe the applicant has been in conversations with Brittany Park. I'll defer to them to discuss that. But right now, the application is for the entire site. As a reminder, the code does have, when they come through site plan approval process, there are buffering requirements between commercial and residentially zoned properties, which would be this case. And at that time, there's potential to request them to have different buffering standards depending on the intensity of the development. But there are standards in place right now for that separation. But the site plan is really when that would be addressed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions for staff?
I have several, but I want to make sure everybody else gets their questions out first. Anyone? Super. Bear with me.
Okay.
So this is a land use change request, not a zoning change request.
Correct.
Land use, super. When was this land use written? When was this accepted and designated, to your best guess?
Gosh, Renee, do you happen to know?
70, 80, 90?
It's been a while.
I would say it's been in place probably since 1990. I mean, that's when the current comprehensive plan was originally following on from the Florida growth management legislation and everything, so
Right.
roughly 1990.
Okay, was that 90? Because I heard in the last application there was a reference to 1998 in regards to that. No?
No,
The last one was an annexation from the 80s.
the 1998.
You're talking about the previous hearing
Oh, no.
Oh, I'm
for
sorry.
this?
Yeah, I pulled a piece of information out that was convenient for me. So we'll say somewhere in the 1990s, the comprehensive plan was accepted and this was designated.
There's been changes along the way, so somebody may have been citing interim amendments, like every eight years or so, we do a major update to the comp plan, so they may have been referencing it earlier.
Okay, super.
So, but 1990s, yes.
So somewhere in the 90s, this was designated ROR. And was that the city of Tarpon Springs or the county or a combination that designated it ROR?
I would say that is a combination. So the city had its own zoning and land use categories prior to the countywide planning process. So when all the municipalities, and this is back then, were creating their comprehensive plans required under the Florida Growth Management Act, the countywide planning authority set out the land use categories that all the municipalities had to be consistent with, and basically we had to use the same categories. So the ROR and ROG, those are all holdovers from the old countywide plan rules. We've kept them in place. So I'll say it's a combination of things.
Okay. Would it be reasonable to say that there was some thought process put into deciding the designation for that area, for this ROR? And Ally can answer, I don't mind.
I mean, I would assume that, there was countywide and local, input into that process.
Super. And was that
yes.
probably done by planners like yourself?
Yes.
Super. Okay. So, is anyone familiar with the term stare decisis? It's Latin. It sounds fancy, but it's not. What it means is it says, let the decision stand, or stand by things decided. I have to be honest, I'm very concerned about looking back on decisions, good decisions that were made, and for temporary or initial convenience, changing them, because we have this micro view as opposed to a macro view of when this was done. And although this seems so casual and convenient, I am genuinely concerned about making these changes without taking a lot of gravity to them and really exercising some thought. So I'd also like to go back. Do we know whether or not the townhomes to the south, whether they were individual, that was something that we probably can't answer tonight, whether it was an individual or their rentals or an HOA. So is there a chance that none of those people know that this is even happening tonight?
I can go and look at our public notice list. I believe there's ownership in there, and their notices were provided. In additional to the mailed notice, as you know, we put signs on the property and we do a legal advertisement. But I can verify once I go back to my
I don't
seat.
want to push that too hard, but there's a chance that maybe no one in there even knows that this is going on
And
tonight.
I have pulled up the list. I don't know if Kim has yet, but these are individual townhome addresses where quite a few went. I was waiting if there were residents here to see when they
Okay.
give their name, if they're on the list.
Fair enough, go ahead.
So individually owned townhomes.
Stepping back to your previous question, under the countywide plan, I do want to make sure that everybody is aware that the category now is retail and services, and everything that's being asked for would be permitted and entirely consistent with the retail and services countywide plan. So that plan has evolved over time. We stayed at the ROR. We have not changed our categories to match the countywide plan or reflect the countywide plan. We're, a little more restrictive in that manner, so I just wanted to put that in context.
Thank you. Okay, I got to check my list. I appreciate your patience. One, who wrote it? Two, where did he place it? Okay, three. This is going to segue off the other gentleman's question, and you're not going to believe this. My number 4 was, what is heavy utility? But number 3 is, if approved, even conditional, what is the most intensive use available by whether by right or condition? What, and then we see the list there, but it's kind of vague. And what I didn't see in there is, this often gets brought up by someone who's not here, is adult entertainment one of those categories?
That is not allowed. That is a use that you'll notice is listed in the Highway Business District, but we talked about this at the last hearing. There are locational requirements for that type of use.
Okay.
This property does not meet them, so they could not be an adult entertainment
And,
use.
and I don't want to, but thank you.
You're
But
welcome.
we've got some really heavy uses that would be available to that corner. I mean, a use that was so heavy, no one even knew what the answer was to it. That's pretty heavy. Okay. Heavy utility, nope. Although the property now is bifurcated, I love that word, by that power line and that easement, it is possible that it could be developed under the ROR as it is now. Might not be easy, but would it be reasonable that it could be developed in some way in the intent of the ROR, which is a little retail, a little residential, and a little business?
There's potentially a way to do so. The issue with residential, with that type of easement, that's an easement for potentially a high voltage
Right.
utility line that isn't necessarily conducive to residential development.
That's great. If I'm not mistaken, isn't there a residential parcel over on the other side of 19 where they're going to be parking cars and having a dog park underneath their high-tension lines?
And Duke Energy, you can ask for special requests to allow certain types of uses. Usually it's surface, like parking areas allowed, but you can't really necessarily build buildings in that location. So there are limitations, but they'd have to work with Duke Energy and look at their allowances.
Super. But it is possible to develop that parcel right now under ROR.
Potentially.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for staff? Thank you. And my guide here doesn't mention the applicant, but I assume we need to go to the applicant at this point.
Yes, we do.
Correct? Yes. So is the applicant present, and would he or she like to comment? state your name and address, and then go with your presentation.
Amy Huber, 745 Virginia Street, Dunedin, Florida. And I am here on behalf of the applicant. Staff has done an exceptional job walking you through the application as well as the request. I'd like to go a little bit further because there seems to be a little bit of confusion or misunderstanding as to where we are and how we got to where we are and what we're asking for. So one of the members of the board raised the issue of the underlying comp plan, and comprehensive plans and future land use maps are very interesting things, especially when they get carried over from a county, like what happened here. And so what happened here is there was underlying designation, we became incorporated, that carried over. The county map, which we still have to also be consistent and compatible with, has changed and morphed. And over the last 30 years, these parcels have not been developed with residential with the exception of one. So in reality, the compatibility is with that individual residential, not all of the rest of the properties, because they all have been developed consistent with the countywide plan, which is retail, office, and other types of industrial and commercial uses. More interestingly, one of the other reasons why we're here is residential is not a permitted use under our existing zoning category. It's a conditional use. So although we're required and obligated to have residential, we actually can't have residential as of right. So there is an inconsistency and an incompatibility between your own comp plan and your underlying zoning, which is what actually brings us to you today. To further complicate things for us, although we understand, we recognize, we're unbelievably empathetic, and we have been working with our neighbor, and you're going to hear that from them themselves, related to compatibility or potential incompatibility with our neighbor. We also, as the owner and developer of the property, have to look at the own compatibility issues of whatever we're going to develop. And through our extensive conversations with Duke Energy, it is not possible for us to develop residential because of the intensity of the use of that particular Duke Energy easement. So when you're talking about high voltage overhead lines and the restrictions related to that and what can go under, around, and through that, it is almost impossible for us to have residential in a manner that would be compatible, safe, or otherwise to have a residential use there. So that is why we are here before you, is because we are stuck in between a rock and a hard place. We have a comp plan designation that requires residential. We have a zoning that doesn't allow residential except by conditional use. And then to further complicate it, we have an easement that pretty much prohibits residential use. And we've been at this for years and years trying to make everything work. And ultimately, we're here before you because the only way to make it work is to remove the residential. We will be back before you because we're required by your code for any type of site plan. There's a concern related to some of the particular more intense uses. Those uses exist today because they're in the zoning. They're already there. It was already determined by your staff through the planning and zoning processes that those uses should and could be allowed and approved in this area. That's why it's highway business. But because some of those uses can be more intense and aren't always the right fit in the right location, they're required to go through the conditional use, which brings us back to you and the Board of County Commissioners. So if we were to try to ask for one of those uses that you all believe isn't compatible or inconsistent, you would, at that point in time, say no, and the Board of County Commissioners would say no. So that's the way that the planning process has gone and has continued to go. So we're not here asking for some huge change that changes the whole philosophical background and belief for this area. What we're saying is this property and these properties along US 19 have been developed over the last 30 years, and no one, except for in one individual location, believed that residential use was consistent or compatible with the high intensity of US 19, especially in this area. The county recognized that and upgraded and modified its plan to remove the residential component, which is why it's been developed the way that it has. And all we're saying is, consistent with that, and the fact that we sit on Pasco County, which just to the other side of us is industrial. So any residential use that we would intend, we've got Duke high intensity level above us. We have industrial to the other side of us. The other part of this application is we're not just asking for the change from ROR to commercial general, we also have wetlands. So another portion of this application, and I think it kind of got overlooked because we were digging into this other part, is we also are changing the ROR to preservation for the portion of this property that's wetlands. So we have a lot going on between the wetlands, the Duke, the neighbors, the industrial, and so what we're simply asking is for all of you to be reasonable and to understand that this is a request that is brought out of necessity. It's one that we have had extensive conversations with your staff. It's why the report is thorough, and it's why your staff is recommending approval. And they recommended approval before. They themselves realized there was a mistake that they had made. They wanted to make sure it was correct, and they're recommending approval before you again tonight. We do understand that there are concerns related to our neighbors. They have been properly noticed. They've all received the notices. We've been speaking with their counsel. Their lawyer is here. You will hear from him. Their president is also here. We have been working. We will continue to work with them. We are very close to a resolution that addresses any concerns, the primary that you all have kind of spoken about tonight related to compatibility as well as buffering. Your code is pretty extensive in terms of what that looks like. We intend to not only comply with what's in your code, but to exceed that, which would address any issues that they have. The other thing that's important to notice is along that property line, that is where all of our stormwater and the wetlands exist. So there is a natural, almost 50-foot buffer that runs on, let me get directions. The southwest corner of that parcel can't be developed anyway. So there's already an additional buffer. So we're talking about the majority of the development actually occurring on the other side of the Duke Energy easement. Oh, sorry. Let me see. I was trying to kind of focus on a few of the things that I noticed you all had concerns about rather than repeating what staff had said. I am going to turn it over briefly. Our expert planner is here. He's going to go through his piece quickly, which will further emphasize that this is the appropriate and compatible use for this property. It's more than consistent with your comprehensive plan, and it actually, this change in your comp plan actually makes it consistent with the underlying zoning where the current comp plan does not.
I have a quick question, if I may.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Ms. Hubert, what is your relationship with the applicant?
I'm the attorney that represents them.
Okay, all right, thank you, sorry.
Yes.
Hi, and my name's Robert Pergolizzi. I'm a professional planner, AICP certified, and I've been sworn. I'll be real quick because Ally did a really nice job. We're seeking this comprehensive plan amendment from ROR to CG because we're trying to be consistent between the zoning and the comprehensive plan. The site's highly commercialized, as you know. It's on a major corridor, a 6-lane divided highway, US 19, through the city. The site is bifurcated by a 100-foot wide Duke Energy power line easement that runs through the center of the property for the entire 650-foot length. The ROR land use, as has been stated many times before, requires residential on the property, and this creates a compatibility problem for us. It creates an internal inconsistency between the zoning and the land use, and the proposed amendment to CG would resolve the inconsistencies, and that's what prompted this request. As was stated, we've got C2 zoning to the north in Pasco County on the north side, along Lewis Avenue. offices, warehouses, and various commercial uses. To the south is Brittany Park Townhomes, which is the only residential use directly fronting US 19. It's got CPD zoning, which CPD is a proper zoning category for ROR, whereas HB is the proper zoning category for commercial general land use. Further south of Brittany Park, you've got Furman Volvo, Furman Chevrolet auto dealerships. Those dealerships all have HB zoning. And then on the other side, as Ally stated, on the other side of 19, you got Caliber Collision, it's IPD, and Northern Tools, a tool sales business, which is CPD. And then we've got that wetland to the west, which serves as a buffer between our site and any residential that it's to the west. It's a large wetland. The justification in my mind for this plan amendment is that the ROR land use designation requires residential use as part of the property. The Duke Energy easement that splits the property makes it residential development extremely difficult and nearly impossible to market given the presence of the transmission power line. US 19 is a highly commercialized corridor dominated by retail, commercial, and office uses. And the large wetland to the west provides a natural buffer. So in my opinion, a land use amendment to the subject property will allow for consistent and compatible zoning and land use on the subject property. The depth of the CG land use would be limited by the adjacent wetland to the west, which serves as a buffer, and the CG area would match the HB zoning area perfectly. And as far as the countywide, there's no change to the countywide plan. The city amendment to CG would not require a countywide land use plan amendment, and it's fully consistent with the countywide plan, which has changed over the years, and we're looking to catch up. As a summary, just stating that we have limitations due to the Duke Energy easement. We're going to have parking and circulation requirements as we get to site plan, and the HB zoning limits future development to a 0.4 floor area ratio. Maximum height is 35 feet. And I know that Amy has been working with the neighbors at Brittany Park to discuss additional buffers and things like that, and maybe they will speak to that. And I'll turn it back over to Amy if she wants to sum up right now. She'll go after the Brittany Park representative. I'm happy to answer any questions you have regarding my testimony.
Yeah, I have a couple. There's a significant change in the floor area ratio as a result of this. That's a pretty major benefit to the developer. That floor area ratio in the area down close to the residences concerns me a little bit. And I know at this point we can't really change anything to do that, but has the applicant at all considered agreeing to a reduced floor area ratio or something on the southern parcel of that property?
I don't know about a reduced floor area ratio. I know that they've talked about extensive buffering and increasing the setback from Brittany Park Townhomes.
Yep.
It's more where it gets deployed, I think is what you're asking me. So
Yeah, largely because it's how it affects the residences.
So if you look at the, I don't have like a pointer, but if you look at the map, you can see where the wetlands is, and then the area where it's grayed out below that. I'm not good at this. Oh, this one? There you go. So if you can see this area here can't be developed. So
Right.
just and then we can't develop anything here. So the majority of the FAR as it gets deployed is all here. The area that everyone is most concerned about is this area here, which is where these two residential buildings are for our neighbors. And that is the area that we have had extensive conversations and discussions related to not only buffering, screening, but also the uses that we would restrict or limit in that area, as well as a reduction to the size and the height of the structure that would go there. And so all of those things will come back to you at site plan. It will be more fully developed. The purpose of this is to release the burden of residential. And as Robert spoke to you about, it's extremely difficult to ask people to purchase a residential property where you have that intensity of overhead power lines. It's just, in Florida, it's not going to happen, especially when you have hurricanes and the other things. It's just not a place where people feel safe or comfortable. And so that is something that is extremely unique and different to this parcel. It's what makes it different. It's why its underlying zoning is different. And so we're just asking for the comp plan to be consistent and to catch up to the zoning.
Yeah, but last time, you didn't have any type idea of what was gonna go there. It sounds like with these conversations that you have a little bit of an idea of what's gonna go there now.
We don't have, in terms of specific uses, an exact of what's going to go there, no. In terms of building pads, the building pads are dictated by the easement, the wetland, and the stormwater. So naturally, you're gonna have a building pad here, and the majority of the rest of it has to go there. The primary things that we've been speaking with our neighbor is related to screening, buffering, walls, heights, and then there were a few uses that were problematic or concerning to them that we have agreed not to place on that parcel.
And I understand completely the need to rezone to something. My only
Well,
question.
we're not rezoning. Our zoning
Or-
stays the
I'm
same.
sorry,
It's-
yeah, to
It's
change the
simply,
underlying
all we're
land use.
asking is to take away the residential use. That is the nature of this. And like I said, the irony is your underlying zoning doesn't even permit residential as of right. So there's an inconsistency. It's been there for a long time, which is why the majority of US 19 is all developed as commercial and industrial. It's not developed as residential. And their actual underlying zoning is different than the remainder of this area on 19.
I completely understand the
Okay.
need to rezone it. You have no problem as far as I'm concerned there. Where you do have a problem is doubling the floor area ratio in that property that's immediately adjacent to the residences, and not just adjacent, but extremely adjacent.
And I assure you, when we're back before you with respect to our site plan, you will be more than pleased with how it plays out, and that is with the input from our neighbors.
Any further questions for the applicant?
No, just a quick comment, if I could, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for continuing to evolve with the information with this. I'm very happy to hear that there's been a dialogue established and possibly some bridging of ideas with the neighbors to the north. That's the most important thing here. As the chairman said, the floor area ratio, that's one thing. That's the pancaking of, what you build there. But I'm also concerned about the lot coverage, and I know you talked about the green area and the gray area, and that maybe this dialogue with the neighbors has been more focused to the area closer to US 19 for that. That also abuts, a large amount of their development. So I'll reserve any opinion at this time after hearing from the neighbors, both the HOA president and their attorney. But I thank you very much, because this was much more informative than the first time we sat here and heard. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, if there's no further questions for the applicant, we'll call for public comments. Do we have members of the public here wishing to speak on this item? Approach the microphone and state your name and address.
Good evening. My name is Scott Gross. I am with the firm of Greenberg Nikoloff. We're located at 1964 Bayshore Boulevard in Dunedin. I am here representing the Brittany Park Townhomes. I think the board has laid out generally the concerns that we have as well. And I think Ms. Huber did a good job sort of describing what's going on, what the situation is. She's correct that we've been discussing generally how to resolve some of these issues. We are close, I would say, to sort of getting there. We've got the big concern obviously for us is noise, and creating some kind of buffer there that would help eliminate the noise. The lighting as well is sort of a big one. I know there's code and everything relating to lighting and the buffering. So we're trying to work through some of these issues with the developer and their council, trying to bring that all to a head. I will say there's at least some concern because of these are townhomes, it's not a condo association. The board of the association cannot just decide how these individual lots and what their owners do. They can't dictate to them, for example, remove a tree or something like that. So there's some concern about sort of the feasibility, I think, from our side of how some of this gets implemented at the end of the day. But we have spoken about building a wall along the perimeter there, at least where our buildings exist, and then doing some other screening with trees and other sort of landscaping to try to eliminate some of the concerns. I do want to let my board president speak to you guys and sort of discuss his concerns. I know he's anxious to do that, so I'm going to let him speak. And if you guys have any questions for me or him, please feel free to shout them out.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I have a question. I think the gentleman didn't swear in at the beginning.
Oh, yes, he's going to say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you promise to tell the truth on the matters before the Tarpon Springs Planning and Zoning Board here this evening?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
My name is Vincent Manor. If you need my address, it's 925 Ozzie Court. I'm the president of Brittany Park Townhomes. There's 59 units, 59 residents, and the reason why you don't have 59 residents here is because the board communicates to them so that the board was going to handle the whole situation so we have something calm and peaceful to deal with and discuss. That's why they're not here. But if I send out the email, I could, the situation is, and can I have the pointer?
Sure.
Okay, everything they're saying is right on. Right on. Here's the wetlands. Now, right here, that's a 4-unit building, then another 4-unit building. This is a dead end, but there's an additional home right here running sideways. So what involves on our property line is 9 residents, okay? It's what's sitting right here, all right? That affects 9 individual right up front. They're right on the war zone. In other words, the other 51 units, they're after it. So whatever happens on this strip here immediately affects my home and 8 other residents. So if there's any equity loss or all of that, but we felt to do it, we would try to come to an equitable decision. But the problem is, yes, we're going back and forth, but it's not as easy as you think. You mentioned about height. Well, we didn't want any 2-story building up against our property. And we're right now saying it's 25 feet, which you don't know. Okay, so we're concerned about that. Then we're dealing with, I can't make those residents take a tree out. I don't have that power because these are attached homes and it's lot. They control everything. They got to conform, but there's certain things I can't do with them, which is a problem. The wetlands, that's true, but it says wetlands, but I'll be honest with you. 10, 11 months out of the year, I can walk right around here and the fence is there and I can walk right onto that property. So it's not a wetlands that's a buffer zone and water isn't always there. As far as what we found out, it's a power line going straight down the center of that, in that blue area, and they're medium grade, not the high tension ones, but they have to be 280 feet away from our building. So what they're saying is true, but then I don't know when you put a commercial what it does. All right, but they had started, because right across the street, down the center of that blue, if you cross 19, there's a pole there, naked, because they're behind. But they're coming right through, they're going through that buffer area, all the way heading to alternate 19, because I've seen. We're trying to come to a solution. I mean, the first thing when I dealt with my residents, they said, Well, why can't they leave our side alone? Develop on the other side. That was one of their concerns. The other thing is the height, the noise, the light. And, I hear and I understand, because that's why we're trying to come to a decision, 19 is commercial, all this stuff. That's fine and dandy. But we're a townhome that was put right there on 19. And we have to have some kind of consideration by the commissioners, the zoning, to protect us. You allowed somebody, I believe it was in 2008, to build our community, or a little bit sooner. So we were there for a good amount of time too. Now, the property, when we purchased it, because I'm one of the originals, when we purchased on that whole row there, we'd come out into our little backyard. We don't have big backyards, 15 feet, that's it. And then we're in our home was a golf driving range. So we looked at it, it was beautiful open grass. Now, we're being asked to let this thing be developed to whatever. So it's just, we need, some consideration from the zoning committees and the commissioner. We're willing to work with them, but it's gotta be within reason. And one of the biggest parts of it is, this by no way, shape, or form should have any of our residents to have to pay for anything. If we're getting down to the nitty-gritty, if they want it, and we come to an agreement and the board says they can zone it, well, there should be no burden on my residents to have to pay for anything, whether it's on their property line or not. If it's inside their property, they're happy. So it's complicated, and we're trying to be fair and be equitable. But we are concerned about the height on our side, we're concerned about the noise, we're concerned about the light, and we still, through all this negotiating, don't really have a clue what's going on our side. And to me, we should know, not speculation, and not just seeing a big square building going. Our building is 96 feet long, then about a 20-foot in between, another 96, a dead end, another row. That's about probably in the neighborhood of 300 feet long. That's a massive box we're looking at and don't have a clue of what's going there. Later on we will, after we sign some kind of equitable decision. So we're relying on you to help us a little bit, but we're willing to work with them, and which we have. But, we're about 70–75% there, and we're already now here to approve it. When the last time, it was not approved for a glitch, and then we turn around, we've only been working on this, we're trying to go as fast as we can. We're trying to be as reasonable as we can. But like they've got to be concerned about the owner of the property, I've got to be concerned about the residents. All of them, but I've got 9 along there that it's going to affect their lives and their happiness of where they're living with. They're willing to bend, but there's only so much you can do. If you have any questions, I'm the one about.
I've got a couple. I think first, we're not approving a site plan, right?
That is correct. You're not approving a site plan.
So the positive that I'm hearing is that the two sides are communicating.
Yes.
And you made a good point that you're about 75%
About that.
favorable, so that sounds like there's been progress.
Yes.
Let me ask you a question about the previous use of that facility. It was a golf range, right? Did you ever get hit with golf balls in your yard?
They had nets up.
Okay, so they had
and
something to protect that
They were there
aspect.
protected. Whatever happened, it went under whatever, but at one point, it was a beautiful place to sit on your deck and look out, and you saw a driving range, the big open field, and it was nice. Then it went under, and now it's just an open field, but an open field isn't bad either. But, times change when we understand that.
Well, my last question, or not a question, again, I'm going to compliment both sides. You seem to be working towards a resolution, so that's a positive. How many years have you resided there?
I've been there since 2014.
And how about rainy conditions? You said the wetlands is pretty dry. Have you ever seen that?
Very rare does that drainage, it'll get, but like I said, I would say if I had to be a bet man, which I'm not, I'd say 10 months out of the year, you're not gonna get it. Maybe the rainy season a little bit, but I've never seen that area flooded. It's a good place to have it, because I know that the flow from Swiftmud, it does go to that area.
Thank you very much.
I have a quick question. You said you've been there since 2014.
Yeah.
Has the utility easement always been there?
I'm not sure on that. I know as we learn things, I believe so, because even early back in 2014, you would see every once in a while Duke come in with their trucks and drive right over the driving range, going to the back of the area there, doing whatever they did.
So you have no way of knowing whether,
How long?
whether the applicants had the property before the easement, or whether this is a
No, I
new
know,
development?
when we were there, he had it, our builder dealt with him now. In 2008, I don't know if he had the property. It was a different owner that went under. I know our builder, sometime in that time when he took over, say 2012, 2013, he went to the owner and offered to buy the commercial, for homes. And all I could find out is that he wanted too much money for the property. But I don't know if that's something that really can be, but I know the person that was telling me was the builder of our community.
Thank you.
Can I add to your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does the city or the applicant know anything about that easement when it was originated?
I was just trying to pull up the actual date of the easement. It's been in place for an extremely long time. And it wasn't until the owner who has owned, it's a husband and wife that own, and they've owned it for a very long time. It was an operator who operated, not an owner of the driving range. The current owners owned it at that time. So you know, lots of times you lease a parcel to someone, they operate it. And so it wasn't until there was a question as to what and how. And so part of I know there's some frustration on everyone's part as to what exactly are you doing? Well, it's very difficult to be able to tell anyone exactly what we're doing when at the current moment, we don't know and we can't tell anybody because we don't have a use in place that actually works for us. You hear our neighbors tell you themselves from their own mouths that you can't have residential next to the Duke, that it's got to be 200.
I'm going to interrupt, I'm sorry. I would like to ask him some questions, so if you've answered his question.
Right, but that is part of it, that's what I'm
Okay.
saying.
I know,
And so
but
that's where we are.
So can you provide the answer to the question, is there an easement there? And if there is, can you look into that and let us know?
Yes, the Duke easement is there. It
Exists.
exists. It's there, and I was trying to pull the actual date of it. It's been in place for an extremely long time.
Okay. Thank you.
It was there when the golf driving range was.
Yeah. It predates them as well, and so it's there. It's been there.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have questions for the gentleman?
No, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, I'm good.
I forgot your name.
Vince.
Hi, Vince, I'm Justin. Thanks for coming tonight, Vince. Vince, are there actually any power lines there?
No, see,
Yeah.
we always heard it was an easement, but I'd say about 5 years ago is when we started here, when Duke's did the expansion on 19, you saw that now they got that, they had the grid there, and now they're doing another one. Well, 2 years ago, with the owner or tenant, they actually leased that whole center area, and they put all their power lines that they put up on 19. And then all of a sudden, another resident found out and got somewhere with Duke, and they said, yes, we're coming down the center of that with a power line. Not your, the old rector set, not that one. The high, just cast metal poles, they're coming down through there with that. But what happened is they're behind schedule, so that could be a couple of more years before they do it. But if you drive by, and right where that center of the blue is, if you look right on the other side, on the east side of 19, you'll see the pole there, just there that they already put in. They just haven't come over to do anything else because they're behind. And then we found out that for our buildings, they have to be, the wire has to be 280 feet away.
Okay.
Now, I can't tell you if a way goes totally like this.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
That's okay. I have a couple more.
Okay.
If I heard it right, you mentioned something about being asked when you were negotiating with the current owner or their firm or whomever, that there was conversation about you and your residents paying for
Well,
something?
we just, it's not, they didn't ask us, but we just want to make sure, you know, in our agreement, we will not have any burden of payment, you know.
Yeah, so just to be
Why are you walking up to the
because
podium?
because we're in the middle of, and his lawyer's going to do the same thing. We're in the middle of a confidential settlement agreement that are not part of the public record and in this public forum. And so we're trying to work through that in private between ourselves.
Yeah, I was going to reiterate the same thing. I just didn't want him to get into the details of what's in the agreement, so.
I'm just saying in general, we just don't want to inquire any extra fees for ourselves due to whatever they do.
I think that's perfectly reasonable.
I do too. I mean, we're willing to work out an agreement, you know, but I don't expect the 9 that are right on the front line for them to have to pay any money for any reason.
Is there a fence there now?
There's a fence that, some of it's been tied together, it's old, it's decrepit. The one behind me, I had to actually redo it so that it would stand up. I'm one of the residents that actually put a PVC fence up to it, but on my property line, there's 3 residents that do have. So the concern is, and I understand from my opinion, you know, if I have to move the fence, but I know I'm on my property line, I'm just concerned if there's going to be a situation where the other residents may have to move it, where I don't think we should even should be considered. But, you know, we're negotiating it, and, you know, I'm going to be quite honest. I don't like anything that can't be said out in public, whether I'm signing it or not. That's one thing our board is not happy about with this negotiation, so you can put it on the record. Whatever we agree to should be out in the open. We don't really want a non-disclosure act, so it is what it is.
Vince, thank you for coming tonight.
All right, thank you.
Vince,
Thank
I have
you.
one more question for you. Without violating anything that you've signed, can you discuss some of the fears that your residents have about what could be there?
What could be there?
Like, what bothers them the most about the possibilities, which are endless, apparent, if this approves, if this is a future
the
amendment?
first thing would be the height of the building. I mean, we understand there's 2 sides. Well, we feel the other side we don't care if it's 2-story on the other side. On our side, we would prefer if it was 1-story, but I know that's for another date. The noise factor. We are concerned about the hours of operation. We really don't want anything that's going to be past the reasonable hour to operate. You know, when you're negotiating, there's where you get into the situation. We don't have anything next to us. We had a driving range. The thing was always done by daylight, and that was the end of it. Sun went down, that was 8:30, 9 o'clock. There was no more driving range. You know, then they had a little building that they sold liquor and then a band, but that was shut down if somebody called and complained because of the noise at 10 o'clock. So we're just looking for things that are reasonable and are not going to, you know, affect our property value. Because whatever affects this strip affects the others, because you know how that works. But we're trying to come to a reasonable situation, you know. We know we don't have to worry about a strip joint, you know. We put in some things, you know, we're discussing it, but you know how that goes.
And you mentioned 75% of your residents are on board, is that?
No.
With
Well,
this, or-
basically, a majority are leaving the board to make the decision. In other words, so instead of having them come here and get, you know, the good ones and all, you know what happens. We just figured the board with our lawyer would be more equitable, fair for you guys and fair for the builder. We're trying to be as fair as we can with the owner. We understand his situation, but we're there. We purchased one way, and now we're asked, for a whole different operation.
We appreciate your approach. And
I want to add on to my colleague, 75%. Of the 9 unit owners, what would you say you all were
Well,
at?
here's the situation.
Percentage-wise?
I can't, right now, we're in discussions, okay? And we're at 75% in agreement of what we're working on. But what I have to do, not only let the total 59 members of the community know, I have to make this done right, I have to go, exclude myself because I know what's going on. I have to go to those 8 residents that are right up against that boundary, one-to-one, and be honest to them as this is what we are going to agree to, and then they give me their opinion.
Can I interrupt you just really quick? Because in the beginning I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
In the beginning you said that basically you came here as a representative
Of the community. Right.
So I think what you're being asked by the
Yeah.
members is, how does your community
Right now,
feel?
what we're discussing, they're satisfied with. But what I'm saying is, they don't have the final draft of what our agreement is.
No, I don't mean the draft,
Yeah.
whatever this agreement thingy is that you have. I'm not asking you
Right now,
to
the board
disclose
is in
that,
control of due.
but I'm just wanting to know how those residents feel about this potential change. How do they feel? I mean, you're
Well, I'll be
representing
honest
their
with you,
feelings.
they're not
and their-
happy about it because they're concerned about their property values. But
Okay.
like the board, and that is, we understand things change, time has changed, and it's
Sure.
better to come to an equitable decision between the builder and us. So that's where we are. But as far as where we are on our negotiations,
Yeah, I'm
They
not
don't know.
asking that.
That's none of our business.
yeah, they can't know because we're not finished. I can give them an idea.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
if there's no further questions, I'll ask, are there any other members of the public here to speak on this? And seeing none, that brings it back.
Yeah, our engineer, I can't read it on the survey. So it was initiated in 1940 and renewed and updated in 1980.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll bring it back to the board here. I need a motion in a second. It has to be affirmative. Obviously, you can vote no on it when it comes time to vote, but that's the way the rules go. And then we can have further discussion amongst the board.
Motion, Mr. Chairman, to approve application 22-140, I'm sorry,
22-141, yeah.
ordinance number 2023-05.
I'll second that.
All right. Let's have further board discussion of the item then.
Well, I for one am encouraged that there's a dialogue that's continuing. That's the most important thing. I mean, generally, people say compromises are achieved when both parties are unhappy, but I like to think that both parties can be a little happy also with the proposed change. Change is happening every day around us. Unfortunately, Florida is growing by the minute, I'm sorry to say, and sometimes that comes without proper planning. The fact that additional uses would be permitted here is my great concern, because sometimes if you open the door, the current applicant, the current property owner may not be the property owner 5, 10, 15 years from now. And the intent of these people, may not be carried on at that point. unless there's something legally binding set by either this board or the Board of Commissioners down the road. What does bring me comfort is that this application will come back in some fashion, both to us and the Board of Commissioners and the Planning Department, for site plan and possible conditional use approval. So there are buffers, on the path, and I hate, not knowing what you know. I'm an HOA president myself. A lot of times you're privy to information that you can't disclose at the time, and that always troubles me because I like being an open book. But I think that the progress and the information that came forth tonight makes me a little more confident that some satisfaction to all the parties can be achieved. So I thank you all, for coming and disclosing what you have, and I, glad to see that the homeowners there are represented in the proper fashion.
Yes, I appreciate what you're doing, and that helps to resolve some of my concerns. And I completely understand that a change needs to be made in the underlying land use. I'm not entirely sure this is the right change, given the situation. I'm still coming to grips with that, I guess, but it certainly helps that the residents feel like progress is being made in addressing their concerns, because their concerns are where my concerns lie.
So, yeah, I'm actually glad that this came for a rehearing. I didn't get an opportunity to fully explain my reasoning for my no vote last time. And a lot of it was because Mr. Vesey covered a lot of it as far as that there's a reason that the code is written a certain way. And in all of my decision-making on this board, especially when it comes to changing the future, something that's going to change the entire code, there has to be a very compelling reason. And a lot of people overlook one of the factors that we should always do is the residents. And thankfully, Mr. Vesey brought that up last time, and I'm glad that Mr. Vince was here today to represent them. And as far as I'm concerned, doing the math, whatever the remaining 75%, which I believe would be about 14 people that aren't on board, that's a no for me. That's them saying they don't support this. And the way that this all happened with having the rehearing again, and then I'll give you much more prepared this time around, which was my concern about having this redone again, because every time you get another bite at the apple, you're always going to come back more prepared. And these arguments were not here the first time, and that concerns me. Obviously, private business deals are private, whatever that is, but again, that just rubs me the wrong way. The residential requirement, I believe, if I can read this right, is 5%. So I think if you put an apartment above a retail shop, maybe that's enough. But I don't think these are the way the changes should come to our comprehensive land use code. We're reworking it now. It was made that way for a reason. I don't think that we change it based on somebody who already has tons of uses available, but yet no clue what they're gonna put there. And I just don't think that that's honest. I don't think they've been forthcoming, especially after tonight. I don't think that reason is compelling enough. It's always, good to bring an expert to back up your position. And Vince coming out here and speaking for those people, that's great, but I still feel that there's a lot of hesitancy there, and I want to make sure that at least we give the Board of Commissioners, the full picture of our reasoning behind, or at least my reasoning behind my vote. So I'm gonna, and just because last time a commissioner wasn't sure why I voted a certain way, this is why I'm explaining why I'm gonna vote no. So those are my comments.
Any other board members have comments?
I have a couple, Chair. I'd like to say that I appreciate everybody's thoughtful words and everybody that came. Chair, I'd like to expand on my concerns that probably are even a little bit more formed than yours in regards to the aggressive change, and even though you've asked twice about what that implication is, I don't feel like we kind of got a good answer on that. I'm also deeply concerned about the completely apparent vagarity about what is being planned and developed. Not even a hint. It's being held under cloak. That's how I feel. It might be wrong. That's just how I feel. That would go consistent with our other colleague, that there just seems to be something missing. Then I'd like to expand upon it, is that I'm concerned that the current existing residents in a way have to defend themselves against something that they don't have to. That's our job, in my opinion, is that this hasn't been approved. The fact that they're in negotiations to protect their backyard before anything has even been approved, that just strikes me as odd. Private business, fine. It just seems odd to me. Maybe that's how it happens. And I would politely disagree overall in regards to the easement concept and how it forces their hand for development, that nothing else can be developed. That is completely and patently false. Because in fact, this board has seen consistently, recently, a large residential development that has the exact same easement running right down the side. It's a fact. Does it make it inconvenient? Certainly. Owners knew it then, they know it now, but because it's convenient and we've got this micro that it is not perfect, they want to change it. And then I'll fall back on the start decisis and say, that's how it is. And I'm going to fall back and say that Vince and his residents really are the ones that we need to be most concerned about, not the temporary convenience of the current owner and what they want. And that their lack of clarity doesn't add to the case. So I would agree with others that I don't think my position has changed. They're welcome to develop it under the very generous land use that is there now.
Any further board comments?
I'd just like to make a little bit of a clarification. I know you referenced the previous one that had an easement. That easement ran along the edge of one side of that property, not down the middle of the entire property. So there's a big difference in that, just for purposes of comparison.
You are very correct. That, and if we may, since it is discussion, that, and here's what's unique, that owner-developer had the absolute opposite take on Duke. They'll let me do anything. I've had permission to do this. We were like, parking, dog park, walk park. He's like, oh yeah, Duke doesn't care. I got the paper right here. I said, show me the paper. And it was like, what was that, Willy Wonka or the dragon thing? I got the bill of sale right here. So I think that there's some kind of inconsistency on the severity of that, because I heard the word impossible. I don't think it's impossible, but thanks for clarifying that.
Any further board comments? Can we have a roll call, please?
Miss Early?
No.
Mr. Rockline?
No.
Miss Francis?
No.
Mr. Zimbelis?
Yes.
Mr. Vesey?
No.
Mr. Seaman?
No. All right. That brings us to item number 8, application 22-93 and 22-9. Oh, would everybody like to take a 5-minute break?
Please.
Yes, please.
And we go to item number 8, application 22-93 and 22-94, ordinance 2023-12. This item is quasi-judicial, and it's conditional use approval and site plan approval for property located at 1372 North Pinellas Avenue. Can we have a staff presentation, please?
Yes. This is a two-part application. We have a conditional use, Resolution 2023-12. Both parts are in that resolution. The location is 1372 Dixie Highway. It's about 2 acres in size, 1.44 acres of which are uplands and the rest wetlands. This is in the commercial general future land use category, the highway business zoning district. And these are the proposed uses listed here. These are all conditional uses. The applicant hasn't proposed any permitted uses or any other conditional uses. This is the range of uses he's looking for, includes warehouse, construction material establishments, construction service establishments, landscape service establishments, light manufacturing, and wholesale trade. This is also a site plan application, so these uses would be housed in 3 buildings totaling 19,825 square feet in size. There are no wetland impacts associated with the project. They have existing access to North Pinellas Avenue. They propose a stub out to access Riverview Avenue in the future. We'll see that's to the south of the property. That is a county road. That stub out is included in your site plan approval tonight. And then there is future access to Dixie Highway shown on the site plan. You'll see that. That is not included with this project. It's just to show the applicant may come back through the site plan process to add an access point to Dixie Highway, how that would look. So that's to show that. This is showing the zoning context, and again, you have a mix of city, the shaded areas are city, and then the aerial with no shading is county zoning. So this is very close, actually adjacent to the site you just looked at, the first one with this meeting. So this area, and it's outlined in your staff report, really future land use wise is slated to transition away from residential, and this corridor would be more commercial and mixed. There's some residential office zoning over here with the church, industrial restricted that's being developed to a boat and RV storage site up to the northwest. There's a mix of commercial and some residential here along Alt 19, and then there's some general business zoning. Again, these areas to the east of the site and on the site actually are wetlands, and there's some wetlands north of the site across Dixie Highway. This is just a closer aerial view of the site. The blue just kind of outlines where that right-of-way of Riverview Avenue is. Riverview is not an improved road, it's an unimproved county right-of-way. So that's located to the south, comes in and butts up against the south property line of the applicant's site. Dixie Highway here, I did mark the roads, you can't read it too well. Alt 19 here, you can see the existing access to Alt 19. And here's an oblique aerial of the site showing the access to the site. And Riverview Avenue, you can see people are driving up and down that right-of-way. It's probably a dirt road. I guess I characterized it right now as a dirt road. The wetlands in the area, there's the city's utilities compound there. and then wetlands and some general business uplands that's vacant here, and then the church and some of the other uses that we pointed out. This is a survey of the property showing the wetland line here dashed along. So this portion of the site, 0.54 acres, is wetlands, and then the rest of it towards Alt 19 and Riverview is the upland portion of the site. It shows the site layout with the wetland buffer in green. There's proposed 3 buildings. In orange, you have the 2 access points. Just to highlight one characteristic of this access point, the applicant has to fill, the site is filled. The applicant will have to bring the grade up a little bit more to accommodate the flood zone. So this finished grade will be on the order of about 4 feet above adjacent grade. So the applicant proposes to put a retaining wall around the site. And we'll talk about that a little more in a minute. But there is a significant grade difference here. So when the applicant pursues connection to the county road, if they decide to take advantage of that, they will need to overcome this grade change in a way that doesn't lose them parking. So that's going to be a challenge they'll have to address at that time. The proposed uses, and we'll talk about this a little more in a minute, we have specific uses proposed for specific buildings. So the north building is proposed to be the wholesale trade use, the middle building, the warehouse use, and the south building, the rest of the uses, the materials and service establishments, and the light manufacturing. Just to show the parking is designed specifically for these uses and for the floor areas assigned to each of these categories of uses. And given that, the applicant has sufficient parking proposed. This is the landscape plan showing where the parking is buffered, the parking lot, and some of the parking landscaping along the road frontages. The applicant did not provide a floor plan and architectural elevation. He did provide some photos of buildings, I believe a building that he built, or some buildings he built. I believe in Pasco County they can address that. I put all the applicant's pictures in the packet for you, just to show what the finished product will look like. Staff, I've given you a brief summary here of the conditional use. These are all detailed in your staff report. The project looks like it will meet the basic requirements of the Land Development Code and the building codes. So as conditioned, the application does conform with the Land Development Code. To that point and to the next point, staff does have a concern with this application, and that is with these specific uses being assigned to specific buildings, the parking, primarily the parking, and to some extent the trip generation is tied to those uses. So the only way to track that the correct uses go into the correct buildings now and in the future is through something called the local business tax receipt, which we've talked about, you all should be familiar with. That's the city's version of an occupational license, where somebody that wants to be a tenant on this property would come in and apply for a local business tax receipt. Staff would check that the use is allowed, and in this case, look up the site plan and ensure that the tenant is in the right building. We have written a draft condition, if the board, and you should recommend approval, that we would recommend this condition to get these tenants into these buildings within a year, or they would have to come back through the conditional use process to go into these buildings. But there is still a concern about long-term future management through local business tax of these very specific uses in specific buildings. The project seems to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. It's highway business. The compatibility and the appropriateness of the site. The uses are compatible with the mix of uses we just saw in the area. The appropriateness is really the question here, as far as how the applicant is trying to allow for a wide range of uses on a site, and what the management issues will be for that going forward for the city. So that's probably the main question. The use is not on a historical site. It is, again, the site does have wetlands. There is a significant amount of fill on the site, and there will be more added. So we have suggested a condition that the applicant go ahead, build that retaining wall to full height, have it inspected and finished before the rest of the fill is put on the site. And we're hoping that would prevent any inadvertent or kind of secondary impacts to wetlands on the site. As far as the last three criteria, again, this property is served by city facilities. It does seem to fulfill the intent for this area and the property. It's, again, under the commercial general highway business, future land use, and the zoning. So it seems to meet those criteria it's basically, on a arterial corridor. It's got existing access. It's well buffered from the residential, is probably at its closest point 700 feet away. But that closest one is that Nature's Preserve subdivision that I mentioned in the last application. So it's pretty suitable for commercial uses. As far as the site plan goes, the project again complies with the comprehensive plan with the conditions suggested. Same with the land development code. It's expected to be able to comply with city building codes and with concurrency management. The trip generation right now is 13 peak hour trips. These are because of the limited clientele that would be using construction material, construction service. So those would be contractors coming up to either rent equipment or buy some type of equipment, not the general public. So the parking and the trip generation requirements are fairly moderate. And so, it complies. If there were to be uses proposed that would bump those trip generation and parking up, that would be a problem on the site, and it could trip transportation management, but concurrency is met on this corridor. The TRC reviewed this last on March 2nd, 2023. This did go to TRC 7 times, so it's been around for a while. And we did have discussions with the applicant about our concerns. Overall, it's, like I say, it's a commercial site. It's appropriate for commercial development. But the applicant, wanted to ask for this specific layout, uses, and the configuration so we have brought it to hearing at the request of the applicant. So we have not made a formal recommendation on this because of our concerns with the management of the uses, but we have suggested some conditions should you decide to recommend approval. 3 conditions of the conditional use approval. Those would be restricting the property to the uses requested, restricting or prohibiting storage of combustible materials, and then requiring that those uses be established through the local business tax receipt system within a year, or they would have to come back to you. And at that point, so the buildings would be built, but then at that point, if someone had to come back, it would be similar, you've seen these in the past, where someone wants to establish themselves as a tenant. You would just be reviewing the use at that point because the site will have been built. Site plan conditions, no outdoor storage, and the applicant's not proposing any. All the uses and the activity, repairs, those types of things, those would all be confined to inside the building. The applicant is proposing bicycle parking, and that's just a condition to meet code. Number 4 is that the Dixie Highway connection would have to come back through site plan approval. Number 5, we need Pinellas County approval for Dixie Highway and for Riverview Avenue connections. And then the retaining wall to be built before the property is filled and graded and leveled and prepped for building. Number 7, that any site lighting be cut-off fixtures, and we would need those to be, and to meet the design requirements of the code, so we would need those with the building permit application. The monument sign, we don't, as you know, we don't approve actual signs here. Usually with these, the signs come in separate. The applicant has advised that the monument sign is a little bit in the visibility triangle. They can I think it's no problem for them to just shove it a little bit over. There's plenty of room, so they will need to get that out of the visibility triangle. We need an access easement they have a private lift station proposed, so we'll need an emergency access easement in favor of the city. And then if this project is over $1 million aggregate value, they will need to address public art. There was one response received to public notice. This was a neighbor, and I was just talking with the applicant, I believe I put it in your packet. Received it a while ago when this was advertised the first time around. This was a resident of just south of the site, and he was complaining about an adjacent parcel. I'll just show you real quick. That is in the county. It is not in the incorporated city. So he was actually complaining about the activity on this south parcel and their use of Riverview. The gentleman lives in one of these houses to the south. This would be, whatever activities he's complaining, that would be addressed through county code enforcement. And as far as the use of Riverview, again, that would be under county purview. When they do come in to connect this, we would be looking for a county approval to connect, and we would also be looking for the design to connect the road. We're assuming the county would require the road to be improved to connect to it, at least paved in some manner. So I'm not sure how the county handles that, but we would be requiring some depiction of how they're going to connect, preserve the parking, preserve grades for fire truck and other truck entrance and exit, those sorts of things. Are there any questions on this?
I have one right for the start. The Dixie Highway access, I see that it says future access not included in this approval. Is there a reason why they're not doing it now? or applying for it now?
The applicant can probably address that, probably because of the wetland impacts and mitigation that would be required, and the county approval that would be required would hold them up.
Second part to my question, when they do consider applying for that, what's the step that they have to take, and what's our role and responsibility in that driveway?
Our code requires changes or additions of access to go through full site plan approval. Yeah, so, without me looking it up real quick to make sure, so it would have to come back to TRC, this board, and the Board of Commissioners.
Thank you.
Typically, when we see these, and it may just be that the applicant chooses to provide them and this applicant chose not to, but typically we see actual building elevations, not photographs of another building, and typically they give us some, at least preliminary floor plans showing us a little more info about what's going on inside. Is that a requirement, or is that just something that applicants generally do to provide us with more clarity?
Yes, elevations and floor plans are on the list of required items to submit with a site plan. But the applicant, and that's why, things like that, we go back and forth in TRC, and at some point, we inform the applicant, if you want to go to hearing, we'll just advise the boards that you decline to submit that required item. Mm-hmm. So we have the pictures instead. And they indicated they did want to go to hearing.
Okay.
Oh, geez, sorry.
Oh, ladies.
I just want to disclose that I do know the applicant, Mr. Mugros. He's been doing my lawn and my parents' lawn since I can remember, so.
And just for the record, since this is a quasi-judicial hearing, you can still base your opinion on the evidence and testimony that's presented here today, correct?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Pat, are the pictures that were provided, is that going to be the exact type of building that's proposed in this site?
I will let the applicant answer that, but I also included an email from him that kind of implied to me that they would be, but I would rather he answer that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did I see somewhere in your materials or your staff summaries that it was going to be required that they didn't do storage outside of the buildings, that everything had to be inside the buildings? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I thought I saw that.
Yeah, and that's a recommended condition number 1 of the site plan approval on page 2 of the staff report.
Mm-hmm. I have a question, Mr. Chairman. Based on the fact that you have 3 different buildings with 3 different proposed uses, would not the state and or city building codes dictate some specific necessities based on those uses, whether it's increased safety, depending upon what type of materials are stored, what type of manufacturing and such? Generally, there are increased standards based on the increased risk that a certain use may propose. So without having those plans, and those plans certainly, whether it's a certificate of use or a certificate of occupancy when they're completed, that would kind of specify, would it not, that those uses would be the only uses permitted in those buildings?
Yeah, there could be some uses that would trigger fire and building code changes.
Mm-hmm.
What we were concerned about would be, for example, we have uses proposed to serve, like I said, a limited clientele, contractors, for example. But the same setup could turn into, or could be used for example, a retail rental facility. I'm not sure, because there's still public entering in both instances, so it triggers, that's why they had to elevate to FEMA flood zone and all those things. But for us, for planning, that's what would trigger or create a potential parking problem for example, on the site, is if we started having more people, for a certain use that has a higher trip generation and higher parking. So that use would not be allowed through local business tax, for
Right,
example.
and would we not then, if they didn't have specific plans and permit applications for those buildings, usually the site plan comes after that based on that specification, historically, from what I'm used to, normally the horse comes before the cart, and without that, it's kind of tough, to hold them to that to some degree, because you're approving something that is not yet submitted to some degree. It's just based on a promise.
Well, the building and fire codes for these uses requested will have to be met. And,
I would have to characterize the approach that they're taking as really somewhat speculative. They want to build the buildings and then probably have individual tenant build-outs, typical of more of like, we'd see like an industrial park type of situation.
Right.
Our concern is that, you've got, every use that's being listed is conditional, and there's no way to put a restriction on all of the permitted uses, which arguably could have a much higher, impact on parking. And so it becomes a bit of a management issue just to be aware of down the road. So the other sticking point really is the fact that conditional use approval is valid for 1 year unless to get it established. And if you don't get it established, then you lose it. And so then every tenant is going to have to come through a conditional use process. So I'm not sure how you get around that, but it is something to be aware of in this instance.
I kind of wanted to ask about that as it relates to the BTR, because it's the tenants that get the business tax receipt. It's not the
Correct.
owner. But this is a conditional use that you're placing on the owner.
It is a conditional use on the owner. So the owner itself will have to have, as a owner and operator of a multi-tenant, building, or property, he'll have to have a local business tax in and of himself. But each individual tenant going in will also have to have a local business tax receipt for the individual uses that come and go. Everybody has to get one. So if you've got a tenant space and it goes vacant for, more than, it's a gradated, period of time, 6 months, it can be reapproved by the by the city manager. More than 6 months, it's got to come to the planning and zoning board. More than a year, you have to go through the process all over again. So that's just the and we have to deal with that with any conditional use in the city, or, as they come through. I think our concern with this is everything on this property is predicated on on these specific conditional uses, these specific uses for the parking and everything. So it's just something that we wrestled with, and so that's why our recommendation is the way it's structured, so.
Any further questions for staff?
I have,
I have one. Oh, go ahead.
no, you first, please.
Did staff review the construction site plan drawings?
I'm sorry, did we review it?
Staff review the construction site plan drawings in their evaluation?
Yes.
Okay.
And the TRC also reviewed it.
Further questions?
Was that the question?
Yeah, that was it. I just wanted to make sure.
I have a couple, but one micro, one macro. Actually, I need to start at the beginning. This application is for a conditional use request,
And, yeah.
but
and site
in
plan.
fact, a very vague conditional use request, a multiple category conditional use request.
Multiple
Could I describe it
categories.
as that?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so to the micro, I'd like to focus in on that proposed access to the unimproved road that runs north and south that's now a dirt road. And that there's up to a 4-foot difference in existing height and the height that's going to be there, and a retaining wall, but yet there is a proposal for an access and parking lot that's baked into this site plan. And there's an acknowledgement that there's a hope that sometime in the future, there's going to be a connection to that road.
Yes.
But that would then therefore make the entire site plan irrelevant because now the parking doesn't match the site plan.
Unless they can, that's why I said it would be challenging.
You're so polite.
I don't know what the county will let them do, for example. And I don't know if it could, you can park on a slope to a certain degree. So without being the engineer there, they would have to, have all their parking to be able to connect. That's why we would have to, one thing we'd review, but
Now,
yeah.
they don't need that access for this site plan to be approved because they're not using it right now, and there's going to be a 4-foot retaining wall there.
Yes, that's correct. They don't need it. They have two-way access onto all 19.
And that small problem is similar to the proposed access at Dixie. It's got its own set of challenges that go with it in the future because there's another retaining wall that runs along there.
Yes.
Okay. There was a notation for approvals, a whole list of approvals that had to be done prior to building permit, and one of them was Swift Mud for drainage. But wouldn't Swift Mud wouldn't that be part of the site plan approval? Isn't it not unusual for us when we're looking at conditional uses that Swift Mud has already approved a drainage plan for the site plan prior to it coming to us? Do I have that not in the right sequence?
Sometimes we get that, but we can't require them we can't require the Swift Mud permit prior to approving the
Okay, we
site
can't,
plan.
it's similar to the elevations. Hey, it's better if it happens, but if you want to submit pictures, that's what you choose to do.
Yeah, well, no, the elevation and floor plan is a requirement of submittal.
Okay,
The water management permit is not necessarily on that list of site plan requirements.
okay.
Compliant drainage that's complies with the city is
Okay.
on that list. They do have a compliant drainage plan. Now, to your point, if they come in with a building permit, a Swift Mud permit, and it changes the layout, the access, that any of these points that kick it back to you, then it's coming back to you. So
Okay.
that's their risk in not having the Swift Mud permit yet.
Okay. And then last but not least, it seems like there's a lot of unfilled and unchecked boxes for this application. Is that, especially with the conditional use, is that because our process isn't strong enough, or is it just because what they're proposing is so unique that it doesn't meet our process?
I would say it's fairly unique, and I would also say that after 7 TRC reviews, the applicant expressed the wish to go to hearing. So that's what we're doing, to not modify the plans, to tweak those things anymore at this point. So,
Thank you, Pat.
yeah.
I assume the fire department has signed off on the access requirements for fire safety?
Yes.
And does their approval rely solely on the Alt 19 access point, or does it rely on being able to loop through the property and out the undeveloped road?
No, it relies solely on the Alt 19 access.
Okay, any other questions for staff? All right, at this point then, would the applicant like to make a presentation? Please approach the microphone and state your name and address, please.
I'm the engineer record for the project, Richard Kelly, 1740 Oak Pond Court, Oldsmar.
Were sworn?
No, I was not. I came late.
Please raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth on the matters before the City of Tarpon Springs Planning and Zoning Board here this evening?
I do.
All right, thank you.
To clear up the Riverview questions, yeah, we have a, whatever, 3 or 4 foot grade change on Riverview. We have no plans right now to access Riverview. That is something that could happen in the future if the county develops the road, or if we choose to develop the road by expansion, if we expand property. But other than that, we have no intention of ever connecting to Riverview. Dixie, on the other hand, is a different matter. We do intend to pursue that, but the reason we're not doing it right away is because the county process is so long, not so much for the wetland impacts and the things that go along with that and the right-of-way permitting, is the easement process for Pinellas County is at least 6 months long, and they're gonna require an easement for the large drainage pipes we have there. And we just wanted to get the property going and underway and operational before we pursue that. And there may not be a need for it once we're open and everything's running. But that's the reason behind the delay, or waiting to do it as a separate permit. Swiftmud is ongoing, it's underway. The reason we don't, especially in the city of Tarpon, we don't submit that, a lot of times what I like to do is I submit them on the first round of comments back from the municipality is when I'll submit to Swiftmud. But because everything goes through, you know, planning, TRC, planning and zoning, and the board, there's ultimately changes that occur. And that change sometimes will require Swiftmud modification. It's just an extra step that seems to be a waste of time, where we can kind of get Swiftmud permitting simultaneous with building permitting, which is before we can start construction anyway. So that's kind of the theory behind that, or the way that works. The Pinellas Avenue access is already built. DOT built that for us when they improved the road there. So the drainage and the driveway is already taken care of for that. For the conditional uses, we selected conditional uses that we felt were appropriate for the property and that we knew we could meet parking with. For example, some of the conditional uses are 1 space per 500 square feet. Others are up to 2,000 square feet. We couldn't fit all 500. And 2,000, you know, if the whole site was filled with 2,000, we'd have an overabundance of parking. So, I mean, it's a possibility. It just depends who the end user would be. But yes, it has to be monitored to make sure that we don't have too much 1 space per 500 uses in there, because we wouldn't have enough parking. And if the 5th one wanted to come in, we wouldn't have enough parking for that. Then they couldn't go. It's similar to any strip center that, you know, has a jewelry store, pawn shop, or whatever, and then a restaurant, a dining establishment. Well, you're parking for all those things. But if another one of those places wants to become a dining establishment, there's just not enough parking, and you guys wouldn't approve that. So it's kind of a similar thing as that. And everything's approved through all the city agencies, drainage, zoning, fire. And the buildings themselves will go through the building permit as far as the interior goes. The exterior is gonna be, you know, Mike is doing, the developer and owner operator here has built those same buildings. Maybe they'll be different color, but they're gonna look very similar to what those do. The interiors will generally all be the same. That just has the dividing walls. And as far as what's being stored in there, we have conditions about the combustible uses that we can't have and all that. So as far as extra protections in the buildings, we don't really expect that because of what we're limited to be stored there. And all that's on the plans, and the parking calculations and everything is on the plan. So I think we're solid as far as those things go. So here to answer any other questions.
Any other questions for the applicant? All right, seeing none, we'll move to public comments. And I don't think there's anybody here, but is there any members of the public here to speak on this item? No, you can be seated if you want. All right, since there are no public comments, we'll close public comment. And does staff have any rebuttal comments?
None.
Does the applicant have any rebuttal comments? All right, we'll come back to the board for consideration. I need a motion and a second so that we can discuss.
I make a motion.
Yeah, okay.
I make a motion that we approve Resolution 2023-12 with the conditional use approval conditions outlined by staff and site plan approval conditions identified by staff.
Do we need to do
Items
those
one-
separately, or?
Preferably, you would do them together because they are both interrelated, and you wouldn't want to do one without the other, which is why the staff brought it forward as one action item.
And then I'll just, and the site plan approval conditions, items 1 through 10, the conditions.
Do we have a second?
I would second that motion, Mr. Chairman, with the conditions as listed by staff for both the conditional use and the site plan.
All right, do we have any board discussion?
I have a couple of comments.
Okay.
I think it's an interesting and nice project, and I think that what they built and showed us is attractive. I'd really like to thank staff, the entire staff, for being so foresightful as to see what challenges the long term of enforcing this very unique conditional use is. And I don't think there's an easy way out of that box necessarily. And we also all know human nature, even 10 years down the road of the changes. And look, I'll go by and there'll be an oxygen and acetylene business set up there. That's humor. But I don't think that they were able to provide a better solution other than just grinding through them one at a time. Now, if anyone on the board had a suggestion to improve that long-term enforcement so that it's not voluntary, trust but verify, I would be interested in hearing that. Otherwise, I'd probably support it.
I do want to say I have one concern that has not so much to do with the project itself as it does with the procedure. It concerns me that we accepted an application that was not complete, and that if we do approve it as an incomplete application, what's to keep everybody else from not submitting elevations and floor plans and things in the similar situation? I mean, it is, I don't want to be arbitrary, but it's clearly spelled out in the ordinance, and it's on that list that everybody gets. So I don't think I have anything against the project, but I do have something against the process, and I've got to come to terms with that before we vote.
Yeah, I would agree.
I was sitting here with those exact same feelings, you know, that it's premature, we're here prematurely on this issue.
how I
And the same as our chairman, I don't have a particular problem with the project. But again, the process, I would agree.
Yeah, I would agree that it does seem premature if there's, I mean, earlier it was brought up about the no building plans, and I think that's almost prejudicial to the applicant as well. If he shouldn't be here, why are all of us here if that's not submitted? It shouldn't, I don't think that they should even have the option to say, I'd like to go forward without it, because again, it's not, the project seems fine. I think the pictures are probably accurate as to what it's gonna look like, but if the process I think does require that it's there. I don't know why it's even here right now.
Follow-up, does it meet the minimum checklist of submissions for a site plan submission? Did it meet all the criteria that you would, the TRC, the committee would review it and say, we've got the full package?
Well, let's put it this way. So there is a list of items that are required to be submitted with your site plan applications. Building elevations and floor plans that's one of the items on the list. Now, we don't really have any specific regulations about, we don't have any specific zoning criteria as to the floor plan question, really. It would just help you understand what's proposed. The applicant put the height in a number on the site data table, so we know that the height complies. So is that aspect of the elevation view. We know the answer to that, but still. So I kind of feel like there's no architectural standards, obviously, in this section of the city. So when you're looking at the elevation and floor plan, I think it's more informational than anything else. It helps you with what the applicant's trying to do on site, and it helps us too. And again, we did hold it up for quite a while for that. And as to whether we should have brought it to hearing, I guess, I don't know if we have anything more to say about that, but, there has to be an action on an application. So, if you all feel it should be deferred or sent back, or the applicant does, that's an option, or if that's something that's such an issue for you. But, 7 times to TRC, and
Is it
there
within-
comes a point where it's kind of like I tell you guys all the time, they get their kind of day in court, and it's their risk to go forward without it.
Is it within our purview to ask for them to ask to defer it, or is that inappropriate?
At this point, you've already taken evidence on this issue, so if there was going to be a deferment, preferably it would have been asked for at the beginning of the hearing, because you've already entered into this process where now you've taken evidence and testimony relative to what has been submitted. And part of your purview is to, let me look up just quickly, because you have in your rules of procedure where it talks about continuances and whether or not you want to have a continuance on this particular item. So,
While she was looking, we're in discussion if there were, per se, to be more time, perhaps either the applicant or staff could come up with maybe a less vague way to address that long-term conditional use. That just seems so difficult for all the parties involved, between the building department and then coming back to us. It just creates opportunity for error, right? For something to be missed and for things to just get kind of washed under.
What I'm kind of confused about is, here we have them proposing exactly what they want to put in these buildings to give us information. But then again, are they're locking themselves into those uses within those buildings? But then perhaps another applicant, we're questioning, well, what do you intend to put in this building? And they say, well, I don't know. But I was kind of guessing that they were trying to be proactive in a way, even though they're lacking on what I would like to see in this application. But in a way, they were trying to think forward, think ahead, and think that we might want to know what they're putting in these buildings. So I don't know what everybody thinks about that or how we deal with it, but I kind of, honestly, in my naive way, I looked at it and said, well, that's nice that they're telling us exactly what they want to do with these buildings, so we have that information.
Well, and ordinarily, that's not the case, because you don't ordinarily have an application that's entirely conditional uses.
Right.
And I'd just like to say, in the past, I've approved plans for what we used to call white buildings. They didn't have a specific tenant yet, but they had a use in mind, and the floor plan and the divisions and partitioning therein would be based on those type of uses, and whether or not the tenant was a doctor or a chiropractor or a bank or a restaurant or something, then, you know, the standard building code applicability would apply to that specific use, whether it be assembly or hazardous or anything in between. As far as enforcement, at least up north, we could impose, and sometimes the Department of State would impose periodic inspections based on a use. So if it was a dormitory, if it was an apartment building, if it was an assembly occupancy or such, these things would be somewhat mandated to the authority having jurisdiction. So whether it be the fire department or the building superintendent or some authority based on that, and based on a specific time period, could revisit, could request, and actually, in some cases, demand a visit for them to continue that certificate of occupancy and that certificate of use. So I don't know if that's something that's ever been imposed here in Tarpon or in Pinellas or in the state, but it's certainly something that would be possible, and whether or not it's by condition or by state statute, you know, I'll leave that to the authorities that be. But that's something that I would like to see imposed for something that's, at this point, very vague.
And if I could, I guess, a recommendation, if we can do this on our agendas, if there is an application like this that is going forward based on the applicant's insistence with incomplete, if maybe there can be a way that we put that on this, so then we can not hear the evidence first and maybe
Right.
defer it.
So here's the way that your rule reads in your rules of procedure. It says, in the event a public hearing cannot be concluded at the meeting scheduled, the chairperson shall, at such meeting, continue said public hearing to a date and time certain if possible. In the event that an applicant has elected to defer an item prior to a meeting, the chairperson shall first announce at the beginning of the meeting that such item is deferred. The chairperson shall also state the date and time certain at which such items shall be considered if possible. And this is important now here too, because in the event that a board member who was not present for the initial hearing, you do have a board member who's not present here today, he or she shall only participate in the discussion and decision-making if before the continued hearing, he or she has reviewed a tape or transcript of the prior meeting. So we would have to make sure that the board member who is absent, if they wanted to participate and vote on this item at the next meeting, has watched this particular meeting via YouTube. So that's what you have there. Your code talks about what's required for conditional uses, which is kind of laid out in you know, the materials from staff, what you have to find in order to vote on a conditional use.
I guess, and like, my concern is that I don't want to vote no based on it. I think the actual content of it, just because I feel like it's just premature. So I kind of want to avoid that opinion going forward as advisory, because that's not really true to my, but I also don't think that we're quite at this point where we should be here yet.
So it does say that site plan approval, if required in accordance with the provisions of this code, can be done separately and must be approved within 12 months of the conditional use approval.
So are you saying, Counselor, that the conditional use would have to
that-
precede?
I
That
think
doesn't
it-
apply to this?
That is, if you're looking at Muni Code, we've had
Yes.
a recent amendment to the conditional use provisions.
Okay,
As
that's
it
not-
relates to site plans, and it's not codified
Got
yet.
it.
So
Okay.
that's why we're in this predicament of these are traveling together.
Gotcha, okay.
And it specifically does state that you've got a certain period of time to establish, so that's why the conditions are kind of muddy as to, we did the best that we could with structuring it to meet the new conditional use criteria which kind of rolled back some things that had changed in the last few years, so.
I have a question for the counselor. Could we vote and approve on the conditional use, and then regarding the site plan, vote on further information needs to be provided? It's like a conditional approval, like we're adding all these other stipulations, but that we do want to see.
So that's where the confusion is coming in, because the way that what I'm reading in Muni Code is apparently different from the last one, and I'm going to ask Renee how the ordinance change reads that hasn't been codified yet and isn't available online.
While she's looking that up, what is the opposite? Let's say what I just asked, is that possible if the Unicode allows that?
Under what is on Muni Code, that sounds like it would be allowed. However, what Renee said when I read that out is that specific portion has changed. And however it currently reads now is going to be what's in force and in effect, and we can't alter those provisions. So if it says that they have to come as a companion case, together, that staff brought it as one item to you. So assuming that the language in the current code that has been approved reads that it has to be brought together.
You find it?
Okay.
Yep.
So what was removed under the conditional use provision, it says all conditional uses shall be subject to the following requirements. The second of that is number 2. It says site plan approval if required in accordance with the provisions of section 210.00 of this code. So you can't run them. We used to have what was stricken through where there was a second sentence that said the site plan and conditional use may be approved separately, but the site plan must be approved within 12 months of the conditional use approval. That was stricken. So they have to run together now. If you've got a site plan that requires a conditional use that are linked, they have to, my interpretation, and they have to travel together as a unit.
Okay,
So-
let me ask this hypothetical question of staff. If we were to approve both with the conditions we outline, what's their next step with regards to providing drawings that someone would review and determine that they are compliant?
Basically, the Board of Commissioners is going to have to make the same determination that you just did, and they could either say, at some point, let's say it goes through and it gets approved.
Yes.
Their next stop then would be to apply for site construction and building permits, and to the best of our ability, we're going to review, obviously, the placement of the building should not change. The interior layouts are going to be subject to whatever they give us. And then the elevations, what we're literally would do would be, do they look like they substantially comply with these pictures that have been given to us? Because that's what we have to go on. So, that's, it would be a staff-driven process if they get through the Board of Commissioners review and get an approval. And, unless there's some other conditions of approval that get put into the process here that says that, well, no, you gotta come back with a site plan approval. We were struggling with this, so.
Well, could I ask, as a comparison, I'm trying to think back when the hotel was being proposed. So there were,
There-
right, no drawings there, because it was all different heights, so there was no site building plans for that, right?
There were not, and that preceded the code change that we just, there was a few things that were triggering, frankly, that rollback and that change in that conditional use provision that says that you have to have a site plan travel with the conditional use.
So can we ask the applicant a question?
I'll leave it to the attorney. We're kind of well outside the normal process here, so.
Yes, you are. If you want, you do have a motion on the floor that's pending. Technically, you should be clearing that motion before, if you wanted to ask for a different motion from the board. So currently, the motion that's on the floor is for approval with the conditions and the seconds. But if the maker of the motion wants to withdraw that motion and the second concurs, then you can reopen for additional questions.
I'd like to withdraw that motion.
And second that withdrawal.
Okay.
Now, can I ask
So,
a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So you've heard it all. You're listening to our concerns, drawings, site plans, elevations. Can't that be provided?
It can. To me, if you ask me, that kind of falls into the same thing as the SWIFMA permitting. There's so many changes that go on. As you mentioned, that hotel project. I don't know if it's the same one that I'm thinking of, but I happened to be here that night, and maybe it was a different board at the time, but it was planning and zoning. I think voted to cut off one floor of that building, of those hotel buildings. If we had architectural plans already and we had to cut off a floor, then, it's kind of going back to the drawing board. So, in my opinion, it's too soon. If we had drawings, if we had architectural drawings, everything, you guys would be looking at the elevations sort of like we are now. What in those drawings would you be looking at to say, well, then we can approve this or not?
I'm going to answer that for you. We didn't have architectural drawings. We had elevations drawings, showing the building, showing its height, showing its design. We had a shell of a structure that we were seeing on the drawings that gave us a representation of what the builder was proposing to put on that property. We didn't look at floor plans.
Okay, then my mistake. So what is different from that than this one?
We're seeing drawings that aren't even tied. That's just, you're giving us examples of a structure and saying this is what the building may look like. And if you had.
So it's just because it's not, that those renderings
It's
aren't.
not affixed on
to
the site plan. It's not, you've got a site plan that doesn't show other than a rectangular box. And all we're saying is if we had an elevation to see what you're proposing with regards to that, rather than, photoshopping something.
I mean, I guess I see your point, but
Well,
we're looking at, we got a 4.
Fortunately,
4,
unfortunately,
5, and 7.
Whether it's good or bad, or whether any of us think it's good or bad, it's a requirement. It's in the code. So the application is incomplete. And if that's wrong, if it shouldn't be that way, we need to change the code. But right now, that's the code.
Okay.
Our
I'm not trying to
job
argue that. I'm just trying to
is
figure out
to only,
where the line is.
we don't have room to interpret the code. Our charge is to follow the code.
Yeah, and I think your proposal is reasonable. And you've been specific to identify 3 types of uses. I just think you gotta give some drawings, elevations of what those buildings are gonna look like exterior-wise, just so we have a feel for that as being part of the submission package.
Pat, can we go back up to those renderings? And as far as the conditional uses for the other thing, while she's bringing that up.
Yeah, those aren't on your property right now.
No, I know.
You're just giving us examples of what they may look like, or what type of structure it's gonna look like.
Yeah, I wanted to see the garage bays and see how many there were. I mean, that one shows 3. One building is gonna have 4, one building's gonna have 5, one building's gonna have 7. That's the difference, but if that's what you're looking for, we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as far as the conditional uses, I think we're very specific, and each of those uses is specific by nature of what can go in them. But just take a hypothetical. Would you guys have been more happy if we had one conditional use? Say one of the, I don't know what the use would be, but one per 2,000 square foot parking thing, and that covered the whole site? Would that have been something more appealing?
Not necessarily. I mean, I'm used to seeing floor plans, and what floor plans do in a lot of cases is reinforce the use.
Concept.
Yeah, that, that you're specifying here. I mean, you have 3 different uses, 3 different parking requirements and such. So you're just looking for additional evidence, at least I am, that those will be the uses. And I think the staff would also feel more comfortable with the site plan and the parking requirements with that reinforcement. So it's, like I said, it's the cart and the horse trick where everything is kind of not in the line where it should be, or is customarily presented, and also, as the chairman indicated, part of the process requirement. So, I would certainly feel better seeing, more information is always better. That's my credo.
Yeah, I mean, we can do that if we have to. I wish I had an architect here to speak for that, but I don't think the internals are gonna look any different from one building to the other. It's just a matter of
Are you the
how
project
long
owner?
the building is.
You're the project owner, right?
Yeah, he's the owner.
I think we're not asking much from an economic standpoint of asking for more what's required of us.
No,
to view.
we just have to go to the next hearing or whatever, the
Well-
next certain date certain would be.
Right.
I don't think you've heard from us, I'm not gonna try to form a decision, but I don't think you've heard anything from us that have serious concerns with the 3 different types of use. It's just that we're not seeing enough of what that's gonna look like, other than a view of
No, I
of the
felt pretty good
property.
about this till the last 10 minutes ago.
Okay.
So, I guess if that's the way it has to go, that's the way it has to go. Will be the next P&Z hearing, Pat? What's the next P&Z date?
The next meeting date for your board is May 15th.
Ooh, once a month.
Look at it as a head start on getting the building drawings completed. Fleshing out those floor plans, those egress pathways.
I think we,
Process-wise.
I think we were waiting to, after tonight, to kick off the architect to get started.
Process-wise,
So,
what
I
do
guess
we
we'll be
do
doing
at this
that
point
anyway.
then?
So on this, the chairman can continue this hearing to the next regularly scheduled meeting of the board to get the additional information from the applicant.
Okay.
So that would be a Monday, May 15th at 6:30 PM here.
Does there have to be a motion for that continuation, or can he just say it and?
So the way that your rule actually reads is it doesn't require a motion. It says that the chairman.
Look at you.
Special.
It says, in the event a public hearing cannot be concluded at the scheduled meeting, the chairperson shall, at such meeting, continue said public hearing to a date and certain time.
All
That's how
right.
your rule reads.
Well, we'll continue this to our May 15th meeting at 6:30.
Okay.
Okay. That brings us to item number 9, application 22-107, ordinance 2022-22. This is a legislative item, and it's amendment of the municipal code and land development code concerning annexation of property into the municipal limits. Do we have a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you. Renee Vincent, Planning and Zoning Director. So, returning this amendment to you again, it has a long and illustrious history here between the Planning and Zoning Board and the Board of Commissioners. So, most recently, we had an earlier draft of this ordinance and that was reviewed by the board in November 28th of 2022. During that meeting, this is for amendments to the annexation land development code requirements. We We reviewed that initial annexation ordinance, and the Planning and Zoning Board wanted some additional controls in place that would allow a broader range of topics to be considered by the Board of Commissioners when considering an annexation. So we worked that into the proposed amendments, and then we brought it back again in February of 2023 to the Planning and Zoning Board. We discussed it again. There were some additional very minor edits which have been incorporated into the final draft. And the ordinance title was also corrected to include changes to section 208.01, because that was not in the original ordinance title. So in addition to those minor edits, at that Planning and Zoning Board meeting in February, you as a board did recommend that the Board of Commissioners direct staff to explore the possibility of pursuing an interlocal service boundary agreement, and that a common land use map be developed for the unincorporated portion of the city's planning area. So those are kind of like separate recommendations, and I will, whether you put those speak to those again tonight, I will carry that forward when this goes to the Planning and Zoning Board as recommendations, but I did want to reiterate that direction that I did receive in February from the Planning and Zoning Board. So with that, the ordinance is not greatly changed from the draft that you saw in February. There were a couple of very minor wordsmithing corrections, and that was on, I think there were just two. I'm gonna find them again in my other draft. So in the first section, 2023, hold on, I'm sorry, section 208, annexations. So the first section, there was no changes. In the under section 208, annexations, subparagraph G6, we added the word land use to that list of non-conforming considerations. So we included, before it just read zoning and development patterns, now it says zoning, land use, and development patterns. And then we also made a minor edit to, I thought there was one more. Oh, it was just the ordinance numbering in the ordinance title. That was the only other change. So so we talked about this pretty much at length at the last meeting. So I will kind of stop and just see if there's any additional questions. Like I said, it was a very minor change from the last review, a discussion, and so this is for your formal recommendation to the Board of Commissioners on this item. So I'm sorry, that was a really horrible report for you.
And just briefly, I did have a couple quick questions, and I did want to read the title into the record of the ordinance. Is the ordinance number 2022-22 staying the same?
Yes.
Okay. So just for the record, ordinance number 2022-22, an ordinance of the City of Tarpon Springs, Florida, amending the City of Tarpon Springs Code of Ordinances, Chapter 20, Section 20-23, connections to public water, reclaimed water, and sewer systems, annexation required, and the Comprehensive Zoning and Land Development Code, Appendix A, Article 12, Section 208.00, annexations, and Section 208.01, compliance of annexations with city, county, interlocal planning agreement, providing for severability, providing for inclusion in the Code of Ordinances of the City of Tarpon Springs, Florida, and providing for an effective date of this ordinance.
All right. Do board members have questions for staff? Seeing none and seeing no publics to comment, I need a motion and a second so that we can discuss.
Chair, I'll motion approval of ordinance number 20-22.
I second it. I second it. Zambellis.
All right, do we have any board discussion? Seeing none, can we have a roll call, please?
Miss Early,
Yes.
Mr. Rockline,
Yes.
Ms. Francis,
Yes.
Ms.
Yes.
Mr. Vesey, Yes. Mr. Seaman.
Yes. All right, that brings us to staff comments. Do you have any?
I would just ask, with these large packets we're sending, we, as you know, have been asked by the Board of Commissioners to include all of this information back in these site plans, drainage reports, all that. So I tried bookmarking those PDFs. Hopefully that helped. I don't know if you saw that, but trying to bookmark each document that's in an application so you can jump to it if you want to
Jump
skip
to
the
the
drainage
tab.
report. Okay, so if you need any help on how to use those, just give us a call or email. And then just a reminder, anybody who wants a paper packet, if you could email us ahead of time, that'd be great. We're going to be still working more and more towards getting this all digital, so you'll be hearing more about that in the future, but maybe just give us a heads up on paper packets. That's it.
Well, under board comments, I just have one quick thing. I just really want to thank all of the board members for always remaining professional and always having enough respect for one another that even when we disagree, we can stay civil about it. And I really appreciate everyone's behavior in that regard, and that has nothing to do with tonight or anything else. I just thought somebody needed to say it. And if there's no other board comments, we stand adjourned.
Thank you.
I want to take you out.
So nice to see you.
Now that we've adjourned, I want to back into your truck.
Yeah, right.